puppet masters almost surely have a plan. There's clearly maybe something there beyond the realm of man. And until we've thoroughly tested every last close-chested view, I find the more we think we know, the less we really do. Where would we be without THC? 'Cause we know they're lying to us, just don't know to what degree. Where would we be without THC? The higher side chat show. Greg Carlwood and company.
Here we go again, Higher Side Chatters. From the Sunshine State, I'm Greg Carlwood. And as the deep layers of our assumptions are peeled back and re-examined, we're finding a lot of inconsistencies with things we thought we could consider the known knowns, basic fundamental facts, and settled science. And it seems that the desire to dig deeper often does yield fruitful new discoveries that the experts would just tell us to ignore. From World's Fairs, Cabbage Patch Babies, and orphan trains to historical timelines, medical science, earth science, and really almost every other scientific discipline across the board. The pattern is often similar, where new information arises that clashes with the established paradigm, and after the initial knee-jerk reaction is overcome, the open-minded among us might start to work out how such new information affects the larger picture and mental constructs we already have established. Then, when we try to share this new information, we're often met with a much more aggressive knee-jerk reaction and emotionally charged arguments that really just boil down to regurgitated rhetoric, trust the experts, and a shockingly small amount of substance. In my experience, it ironically ends up being that the critics of a given paradigm actually know the details of the established narrative far better than those who aggressively defend it while being unwilling to explore alternatives. Well, what if this template also applies to things like geology and things like natural transmutation? What if it applies to myths and legends of titans in an ancient past that's far more bizarre than caveman and campfires? And in fact, maybe it's not even that ancient. Folks, you can't help but wonder when you dive into the work of today's guest, Mike Wilkerson, which he calls Biogeology and explores deeply on his YouTube channel, Stellium7. I myself am guilty of rejecting these possibilities until I was drawn in more deeply by our old friend Analog. And I might not yet be fully convinced of it all, but I am convinced that it's more than just silliness and creationist wish fulfillment. I find the premise pretty out there, but in the spirit of not doing unto others what has been done unto me, I'm here to give it a shot and take the ride. But that's not all, folks. Mike also has a new book out titled The Hacker Prince that finally tells the tale of his youth. You see, Mike spent his teenage years back in the 80s at what really was ground zero for early computer hacking and spent a lot of time within that developing community. In 1985, he infiltrated Microsoft, a Boeing subsidiary, and 2 other Seattle corporations and was caught. Mike became the first person in the world to go to jail for the crime of computer intrusion, aka hacking. After that, Mike spent over a decade practicing chiropractic care in Spain, aiming to transform world health one spine and mind at a time. Not 1, but 2, or maybe even 3 lives lived far more interesting than my own. Let's get into it. The biogeology guy and another artist formerly known as Prince, the sprinter himself. Mike, welcome to the Higher Side.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, man. And
fun opener. You're the best at that. Nobody does it better.
It's easy. It's easy. And just for context, the Sprinter was your online hacker pseudonym, and Prince was actually your given name at birth. I actually thought when I saw the book that was a little presumptuous. I'm like, this guy calls himself Prince. Well, okay. But so for anyone thinking along those lines, that is the reason. But that whole story is wild. I really liked the book, and I have nostalgia for the time that you were going through all that. And there's definitely some good stuff in there I want to get into. But I think we have to start with the biogeology material because it is just so bizarre. It's what you're known for now. I watched a presentation actually where you yourself went over how poor some of the overall discourse and intellectual rigor has been on this subject, which was really refreshing for me to hear. If, in fact, I was probably wrong to dismiss you as being part of all that stuff, I'm sure I'm not alone there, and it's probably a good place to start. For people who might look at this as like looking at a mountain and saying, whoa, it looks like it could have been a person's face or a giant creature. or those who might think it's a low-res attempt to validate creationism or something like that. Let's get out in front of those assumptions while they're still on their daily commute and still have time to stick around with us. Talk to us about what biogeology is and how you're a lot more analytical than that.
Biogeology is a term that I appropriated from mainstream science that's little used, and it describes the exchange between the biosphere and the lithosphere. And most people have never heard of that discipline in the science paradigm. And so I thought this is a wonderful term to denote the distinction between the mainstream narratives that we've been given about the nature of petrogenesis, in other words, where stone comes from, and alternative theories that I was coming across and then also was formulating on my own. So I thought this is a wonderful way to denote that difference, because we're given stories about how stone comes about. And it's a pretty simplistic model, really. The cycle of petrogenesis is what it's called, where you have the dying of plant and animal life that are laying down over long periods of time and then eventually compressing. And that's what we call sedimentary layering. And then that compression becomes so great that those layers start to melt and swirl, and then we get these much denser kinds of stone, like marble, for example. And then as that continues and you get closer to the Earth's mantle, or the core of the Earth, you get this immense heating, and that all melts into magma. And then that's pushed up through fissures in the Earth, which we call volcanoes. And you can obviously witness volcanoes doing their thing and lava coming out of them and eventually cooling. So we know that the formation of igneous stone comes about in the way that we were taught. But there are a lot of things to suggest that maybe the other things aren't exactly as we were taught. And so that's why I appropriated the term biogeology, because I thought it was a great umbrella term for a lot of different things that I was coming across that had to do with titans, gigantic trees, the possibility that petrified organs might exist in large quantities, but we've been blinded to the possibility by the paradigm that we've been raised in. You've got the sedimentary, and you've got the metamorphic, and you've got the igneous, and then I use that term to describe titans, trees, petrified organs, and just this idea of rapid petrification, that there might be different ways in which petrification comes about far quicker than we were taught. Because we know that petrified trees exist, and we're given these timelines that this is something that happened 200-300 million years ago. It takes thousands or even millions of years for that to come about. But what if it can happen very, very quickly? And
Right.
That's really what my whole channel has been about for the last 7 years, is exploring those ideas.
I love it. That's a great intro. And the speed in which this stuff can happen is, I think, one of the most compelling elements that we will get to. But another thing I found compelling is that it's not just a profile of a mountain that looks like the profile of a face, or, in the case of your multi-part documentary, a huge 3-mile long Titan mammoth or some vertebrate type of thing. It's not just the shape of it that looks kind of like a mammoth. It is actually that there seems to be caves and cavities inside this particular mountain, at least, that match where the eye socket would be, or where the ear canal would be. So it's not just the outside. You have to look at this thing and say, okay, here's what we're looking at. It looks like it could be a mammoth, or like a giant dog laying down, or some kind of 4-legged creature. And then, okay, that's one thing. But then going inside the mountain and having cavities where organs would be, and having that match up, now we're cooking with gas. Now we're talking about a true mystery. And that's something I hoped you could elaborate on. And if you have easy to access photos of that, it would be probably pretty compelling for people to see.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about the concept of pareidolia, which is this idea that we recognize a face in something or a shape, and it's not actually there. And there are loads and loads of photographs circulating from the people who are interested in these subjects of titans or gigantism in general. basically they're presenting these things as if it's just proof of, as a fact that these things once existed. And I was highly skeptical early on. I come from an academic background. I have 2 college degrees. I did a master's in chiropractic, and part of that was a master's thesis. And so, we learned a lot about the scientific method and how to properly apply it. And so I was seeing these videos and photographs and the claims being made, and I was like, okay, it's a fun idea, but is there truth to it, and where's the follow up? And usually it's just one photograph from one angle. They're not accounting for the possibility that there could be shadows that are shaping the look, foliage, snow, that sort of thing. I originally came across these ideas through a few different videos. One was one called Geology Revived by a channel called Wakey Wakey that no longer exists. And he was just pulling at the threads of geology and challenging the cornerstones of some of the major beliefs about petrogenesis and how stone comes about. Then there was a video called No Forests on Earth, or No Forests on Flat Earth, that was looking at the giant tree idea and looking at these different tabletop mountains that exist around the world and places like Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and suggesting the possibility that these were once great trees. And we're talking about things that were an order of magnitude larger than the largest trees on Earth right now, which would be your sequoias. So I thought it was fascinating, but it wasn't something that I was going to like jump into and study more in depth. But another channel, J Dreamers, he was talking about this subject, Titans, and different things that had to do with eschatology and cataclysm and different periods in time when there were great dyings off. And even in the mainstream geological model, they talk about that. They say there were 5 great cataclysms, the most recent having been the asteroid strike that supposedly wiped out the dinosaurs, and several before that. So we can see in the fossil record that there are all kinds of species that once existed that no longer do. But J Dreamers was really synthesizing a lot of these different ideas in a way that was pretty palatable and made sense to me. But I still wasn't completely convinced. But it was really the penny drop for me, because I'll show some pictures in a little bit. But there were some different sites that he showed images of, like an island just off the coast of Maui, and another place in Iceland that looked very much like elephants, not just from one angle, but from multiple angles. And for me, that's a key when it comes to pareidolia. If you're looking at something from one angle, well, what's it going to look like if you're looking at it from 90 degrees rotation? Is it still going to look like what you're thinking? Is it going to look at, if you're looking in 3D and you're tilting and you're zooming around, does it look like that from all these different angles? And I would say the vast majority of what's being shared out there doesn't. And so that was an annoyance for me because of the steadfast claims that were being made. So once I saw his video, that was when I just kind of went, wait a minute, because there's this mountain in the town that I live in here on the Costa Blanca in Spain called Montgo. And it's also known affectionately as the elephant here. And the reason is because it looks a heck of a lot like an elephant. Not just the overall shape, but like you mentioned, there's a cave right where an eye socket should be. And that cave isn't just an opening. It's actually shaped like an eye socket. Like we have this eyebrow bridge. And if this were a vertebrate, or specifically like a mammoth or elephant type creature, theirs is far more pronounced, and it has that feature. And so I had been up at that cave many times on my own, just hiking and checking it out, and never contemplated the possibility that I might be walking on an ancient titan. But I thought, what a fun, flight of fancy. This is an interesting intellectual exercise. Let's just see what comes about. So I got on Google Earth and I started looking at this thing, which is pretty high resolution because this is a nice tourist area. So I was able to get a lot of detail with Google Earth and tilt and rotate. And what I found after about an hour of looking is that there were about 8, 9, 10 different macro anatomical features that matched up perfectly with anatomy and were where they should be. And so I was like, that's already a pretty big number. It's one thing if you're looking at something from one angle It's another thing if you're looking at it from an angle, it has an eye socket. There's a quarter moon discoloration. It's basically the whole mountain is limestone, so it's gray or white, and everywhere that the rock is broken away, it's actually reddish underneath. And in fact, when you do break away rock, it exposes these channels that are filled with a red earth and oftentimes iron ore and quartz crystal. And so we can get to that later, but that's basically it's in alignment with the composition of bone, which I hadn't really hit on until later on when I started gathering the information about the mountain. But there's this quarter moon, I say cutout. It looks like an ear was removed, and it's in the exact place that an ear should be. So, and then if you think the head and the shoulders, it curves in on both sides, right where the head would meet the shoulders. So each one of these is a point on a list of features, right? And the longer that list gets, the more bizarre it is, right? Because it's one thing if it looks like something from a certain angle. It's another thing if there's 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 things that line up. And in the 7 years since I started this process of examining the mountain and looking at it, I've accumulated over 50 anatomical and histological correlations. I've been in the caves, I've spelunked them, I've photographed them, I've got video, I've taken microscopy to it, 1000x microscope, and really done a pretty thorough, in-depth investigation into this. And so when you think about games of chance and rolling dice and what are the odds of rolling double sixes, what are the odds of rolling it 3 times in a row or 6 or 10 times in a row, that number gets astronomical very quickly. And it's the same thing when you're looking at a list of features that are highly specific, and I can show people later on what I mean by highly specific. The greater that list grows, the more likely there's some sort of a pattern at work. And then whether we're in some kind of a matrix that's, morphing to accommodate my examinations, or if this is, the Twilight Zone, I don't know. But the more I got into it, the more surreal it became. But I went in very level-headed. And after that initial foray into the idea on Google Earth, I got out my anatomy books from school and I started looking more in depth at the anatomy of the eye socket, because I remembered from school that the eye socket is very detailed. It's comprised of 7 different bones that make that place where the eyeball sits. And all of those bones have meeting points that are known as sutures. And then there are also fissures, which are, gaps between those bones where things like the optic nerve and blood vessels are traveling, right? So I had a list of things that I would expect to find if there was any, truth to this harebrained idea. And I went up to do a little reconnaissance. And on that first trip up to the eye, after, looking at it through Titanology eyes, I found an additional 10 features within the cave. So already we're up to about 20, and that's a big number. So the question is, to the skeptic, how big does that number have to get before you start to consider something a possibility? When does it become a plausibility? When is it a probability, or when is it just a fact? And for a lot of people, that number is far lower than it is for me, because I'm skeptical of my own work as well. But there's a lot of other things that have come along since then that I'm far more confident about than the mountain, which is surprising. Consider how much data I accumulated.
Perfect. Well, that is a great summary. And I think I'll probably just have my editor play the trailer during the talking that you were doing, because I feel like the trailer on mute really does a good job of showing the cavities as we're talking about them and stuff, because we're already 25 minutes in. There's so many things I want to ask you about. Another thing I did not know about you before getting into this work, when I was kind of just dismissing it, is, yeah, you're not a geologist, but you have a master's in chiropractic, which means that you are very intimately familiar with one half of the knowledge base of making this sort of claim. So I feel like that's significant and should count for something. And I'm also not a huge fan, surprise, surprise, of citing the Bible as evidence for something. But the Book of Enoch is sort of different because it's a special case, and these non-canon books, I put them in a different category of, hey, if they wanted to take that out, there's a reason some truth must be revealed. And
Yeah.
the Book of Enoch describes the Titans and even gives measurements that fit with this mountain. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there too.
Yeah.
But you just mentioned that there are new things outside of the mountain that you're more confident about. What are those things?
Well, that's the evidence in favor of the big trees. Most people kind of stop short at the Plateau Mountains or Devil's Tower, and then there's lots of debate even within the so-called truther community about what it is or isn't. And I just see that as a data point. It's pretty compelling. You look at it, I'll show a little, video clip for those who aren't familiar later, but it's just one of a plethora of points that actually are in favor of the theory and dovetail perfectly. The Tabletop Mountains is one thing, Devil's Tower is another thing. Is there more evidence? And there is a ton of evidence. And a lot of that I've seen with my own eyes. There's a channel called Hangman 1128, and he started his channel around the same time that I started mine. And while I was exploring this mountain and presenting the evidence that I was finding, he was doing the same thing in Colorado and in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And he was presenting images and HD footage that was just jaw-dropping for me. It was so clear that what I was seeing was the remnants of tree, but on a scale that we can't really fathom. We're talking trees that were miles wide at the base. So you can only imagine how high up into the sky something like that would have stretched. And so that sounds absolutely absurd. And where did the trees go? And, where's the evidence for that? And we can get into that as well. The other thing was there were all kinds of anomalous examples in the field of geology that I was totally unaware of things petrifying that shouldn't be, of things happening very quickly that should take far longer. And then along the way, I came across the Heartstone phenomenon, which is a discovery of my own, where I recognized that a stone that I saw on a river bottom was matching up with the anatomy of a heart to a very high degree of specificity. And I thought, okay, this is wild. I got to take this home and examine it and get out the anatomy books again. And when I did that, I found initially about 15 different anatomical correlations on that one stone. And it's highly specific. I'll show that as well. And then I figured, okay, using the scientific method, ideally things should be scalable, they should be repeatable, they should be highly specific, and they should be predictable, right? Those are kind of the cardinal things you're looking for when you're looking for a pattern, or whether or not, a pattern that you think you're seeing is actually a real pattern. And so I went out and started looking for more of these things, and I started finding them in droves. And it's astonishing what I've found and what I've presented. And you were also mentioning the whole creationism thing. I just want to come back to the apocryphal texts and the Book of Enoch and Jasher, because I wasn't aware of any of that stuff, because I'm not coming at this from a Christian background at all. And I was aware that several of the channels that I was initially looking at that were talking about these kinds of concepts were very much coming from that angle. And I'm like, okay, well, this is reifying their faith in the book. Obviously, they might have an unconscious vested interest in this narrative being true in one way or another. So they, might start to bend the data in order to fit their narratives and their book. But then I found out about Book of Enoch. It says 3,000 ells were how tall these things were, and that equates to roughly a mile tall. So that's perfectly on scale with this mountain that I'd been exploring, and I had no idea. Man. And then there's a lot of synchronicities that have happened along the way too, like the river that goes alongside this mountain is actually named Gata de Gorgos, and the Gorgos were the Gorgons, and one of them was Medusa, the goddess of instant petrification. Looked at something and boom, it's stone, right? So I'm like, okay, what are the odds of that? And then the Heartstone thing led to the discoveries related. I don't know if you saw the helical heart, that the heart is not what we were taught in school at all.
Yes, I actually have had a guest do a deep dive on Rudolf Steiner's take on the heart, that it's a double vortex, and that's all very compelling. Like, blood is a bit of a mystical substance. You can't ever really study it inside of a body, it's studied outside. When it's oxygenized, it's not the same thing. And when it's separated from the whole, it's also not the same thing. So any scientific assumptions made about blood, I mean, they're kind of weak. And then you got Gerald Pollack, who's been here before, coming up again soon with his new book on anti-gravity. But he also discovered the fourth phase of water and the water in the cell and the gel state stuff. And yeah, the more you dive into assumptions in the sciences, the more you learn that that's pretty weak. And that actually there's a mystical philosophy about some of this stuff that it can't be studied the way they say it does. You can only study dead tissue, really. You can only study cut out, burned, dead tissue that's been mixed with formaldehyde so it shows up in the right way and added dyes to it. That's not what it really is. You've altered it. And like the scientists, you know, they'll look at a lot of this evidence or something and say, well, you altered that. It's like, well, look at what you're doing in the lab that you know, your alterations are apparently okay. And this is just picking up a rock from a riverbed that happens to have all the same qualities of an actual mammalian heart. You didn't do anything to it. You didn't take 4 rocks together and put them together, or you didn't slice off a piece of the rock to make it look more like a heart. So yeah, very interesting. There's so many different avenues we could go. And with the remainder of the first hour, I just wanted to
We're going
get
5
into,
hours, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, hey, I'm home now, so I'm on only our time. I wanted to talk a little bit about the wood and gold relationship, or this general theory that you've got that biological materials break down to some of the precious metals and gold and stuff. Because one of the questions is, why would they lie about a lot of this? Well, obviously, there's a lot of money.
That's the biggest answer. I mean, well, that and just, I mean, I've come to the conclusion that ology is synonymous with gatekeeping. I think all of the ologies are compromised, in my opinion, and they wouldn't have an ology about something unless there was a need to gatekeep. And
I agree.
And then when you get into the Royal Society and the Nobel and all that, it's just more of the same. So obviously, these theories of mine don't work on a ball the size they told us, right? Because you can't have trees that big and creatures that big. They would just, you know, be right back where they started pretty quick. So I'm open to the possibility that the earth is not what we were taught either, which is, you know, one of the biggest rabbit holes of all. I don't assert a shape, but I'm definitely a globe skeptic. And I think NASA and all of the space agencies have been feeding us a load of bull for decades. And so awakening to that as a possibility starts to open the doors to the idea that, well, maybe the realm isn't what we were taught. Maybe it extends far further out. You know, we don't know. Maybe it's hollow. Maybe it's, you know, there's a lot of maybes. But you don't have to know what something is to be able to determine what it isn't. And so if you're presented with a model that is faulty and you pick apart that model, it's actually fallacious reasoning to say, well, where's your model?
Yes, no, I agree with that too. Even about 9/11, you know, something as simple as 9/11, you can look at the footage and say 2 planes didn't knock down those towers. And then they say, well, then
3.
Tell us what did. It's like, yeah, it's like, well, it's not up to me. Maybe it was nanothermite. Maybe Dr. Judy Wood was right. It's really not up to me. You know, you gave a false story. That's the lie. That's what we should focus on. But okay, in terms of wood and gold, so there is this relationship. Like, I was a little ignorant of this. Obviously, analog broke me into it a bit, but I thought it was super weird. So last night I went online and I'm doing some digging because it just didn't sound right. But it's true. You can find gold in petrified wood. The internet will tell you that it's rare, but rare does not mean it's not true. Like, you know, that rare is a qualifier. If it happens ever, then it can happen. So they're not denying it. And then there's forums and subreddits where people are asking, hey, is this gold in my petrified wood? Because they're also surprised. And then commenters who have degrees in this stuff will say, well, I don't think that's wood, but it does look like gold. And then the argument devolves. But it just goes to show that it's a lot harder to distinguish these things, even among enthusiasts. What is a rock, what is stone, and what is petrified wood? I mean, the story goes that when NASA gave the moon rock to the Netherlands as a gift, they eventually tested it and it was petrified wood. Why wouldn't they give him a rock from the Arizona desert? They gave him petrified wood. So obviously they were trying to fool them and they thought that would be a good way to do it. So it's just another, you start hearing these things stack up and you're like, huh, the relationship between petrified wood and stone or gold is, closer than people realize. And then I want to throw this in and then I'm going to turn it back over to you. But one of the big things that I thought was so interesting after hours and hours of your work is rapid petrification, because our whole model relies on the timelines. And we've already dissected carbon-14 dating with previous guests, and I think that's pretty well dismissed, but people still think about geology and the sedimentary layer and the layers of the earth and the little cartoon depictions that my kids are seeing in school, probably right as we speak, of all these layers of the earth and how many millions of years it all took. This is where it gets interesting, because you have many examples of human-made, very rapid, short-term petrification. Doesn't take millions of years, doesn't even take millions of minutes. They can expose wood to certain conditions and gases in a lab and petrify it within days. They grow opals from wood. Coalification and biochar is another example. I mean, biochar is a big thing, but it happens quite fast. And if you were to study it in isolation, you might think it was the decay of matter over millions of years. And then you mentioned a guy who goes by Nighthawk in Light on YouTube and shows a process of combining chromium oxide, aluminum oxide, steel wool, a couple other factors, and he makes rubies in a microwave in minutes.
Seconds,
okay. And then you have a slide that cites trees with metals, dog hearts, acorns, and potatoes. There wasn't much elaboration on those things, but the general idea that even fossilization and similar processes do not take as long as we've been told is very interesting. I mean, it's like the timeline of all these different eras from the Jurassic and Cretaceous. I mean, it's not as rock solid, pun intended, as they tell us. So talk to us about some of these things, because the wood gold gem relationship and this is the really fascinating stuff to me. You don't need a giant titan to get into this.
I've come to the conclusion that there are a variety of different ways things can petrify. They can petrify through extremely high heat. They can petrify through electricity, plasma. The mainstream model is what's known as paramineralization, which is the infusion of the mineral elements that are in mud and coming slowly, working their way into the tissues as the water and the gases that are in the tissue, whether it's plant life or animal life, are working their way out. And that is what we're told is the petrification process. But we're given these extremely long timelines. And as you mentioned with carbon-14 and, the dating techniques have often been hotly contested as they've been introduced. And then later on, they're settled science and dogma, right? And so we're told all these things about the timelines, how long it took for things to come about that may not actually be true. And, when Mount St. Helens erupted, for example, it laid down like 30 feet of layering, so from the slurry flow of the pyroclastic flows. There's a geologist that was examining this, and he's like, well, normally we would look at this and we would think, this took millions of years to form because you've got all this micro layering, but in reality it formed in a matter of hours. And then later on, trees petrified as well, so that's a far shorter timeline than we were given. There are two studies that you made mention of. One is with some Japanese scientists where they took 7 different pieces of wood and they put them all in hot volcanic waters, which have high mineral content. Each year they removed one piece of the 7, and by the time they got to the 7th year, it was fully petrified. So that's just another one of those interesting things. Volcanic ash combined with high mineral content waters, worldwide flooding. If you've got asteroid strikes or you've got whatever the cataclysms are, imagine the whole ring of fire going off at the same time, all of those volcanoes spewing up ash. Well, when the ash goes up in the air, it's highly conductive. So the biggest electrical storms in the world have been seen and recorded over volcanoes. That's where you can get the most magnificent, lightning strikes. Well, imagine if the whole atmosphere was filled with that kind of stuff, because you've got hundreds or thousands of volcanoes erupting simultaneously. That's the kind of thing that could have happened in the past. And then when you look at what plasma does, like there's experiments where they're taking electrodes and they're putting them on wood and they're burning this fractal pattern in the wood that just happens naturally. And this gets back to your question about the petrified trees and the metals. So that fractal pattern, on a larger scale is known as a Lichtenberg figure. right? And you can see these when you're looking over the Earth on Google Earth. There are lots of these different fractal patterns that they tell us are formed by rivulets that eventually accumulate into rivers. But if you just think about it logically, that really doesn't make much sense. The largest of those Lichtenberg figures is the Grand Canyon, right? So we're talking about a fractal pattern that's branching just like our lungs or trees would branch, but it's being done by burning on the wood. Well, what if there was a plasma storm that was 100,000 times bigger than the biggest one we've ever recorded? Could that do something like create the Grand Canyon, right? We can't. It's hard to fathom these kinds of events. You know, you can look at the results of them, but to actually imagine it happening is a challenge. But when it comes to the metals in the trees, this is something Ben sent me. I mean, he and I have known each other for a long time, and he has fed me a lot of articles over the years that were matching perfectly with the things that I was finding and theorizing about. And then he's got these, 100-year-old pre-Rockefeller takeover articles, that are talking about this stuff matter of fact, talking about petrified organs, talking about petrified fruits, talking about gigantism, talking about crazy cryptids of enormous size. And when you read these texts, they have a ring of truth about them. They're extremely well written. It doesn't seem like it's like a National Enquirer of the day. They're quality writing. So, and he started sending me these, and some of the ones that were most interesting had to do with the petrified forests, which they harvested. So now we have a couple of spots where people can go and pay to see the petrified trees and maybe buy a piece of one. But these used to be all over the nation, probably all over the world. Where are they now? They were harvested. Why? Because they were filled with gold, silver, copper, and all kinds of, probably precious gems and other things that they were grabbing. And I mean, there's one article where it's talking about they were assaying $15,000 of silver to the ton from these petrified trees. That's a lot of silver. That's $600,000 by today's money. If you go back 100 years. Per ton. That's a good return on your investment, right? So people ask, well, why would they lie about this? If our myths and our legends and our historical texts and our religious texts are actually telling the true story of our past, and they're not just, fantasies that were hit upon by primitives, then there must be a reason, right? And well, maybe part of that reason is the heliocentric evolution, comet strike, cosmos, that we justify our $1 trillion space agencies because we got to get off this rock before we get destroyed. So that's one big giant black hole when it comes to finances. But another is mining. How important is mining in this realm? It's pretty darn important. And if you have a jump on where the good stuff is, because that used to be a tree and that used to be a creature and who knows what that was. If you know those things and everyone else is bamboozled into believing these simplistic stories that we've been given by the mainstream narrative, I call it paradigm blindness, right? You're blinded by the paradigm. We're all blinded by paradigms in one way or another. And we grow up having a certain set of beliefs. There's your vested interest right there. If you're going to get a jump on all the precious material. So just to relate this back to the plasma thing is, they can find gold in the leaves of living trees. It's not just petrified trees. It's very, very, very tiny quantities. And what they're telling us is that the trees are sucking it up out of the earth. And the question is that true, or are the trees creating it? Because in the mainstream model, they don't talk about biological transmutation of elements, and they don't talk about like plasma or electrical transmutation of elements. We're told that one kind of an atom can only turn into another kind of an atom in the heart of stars, or in something like a particle collider, or in a nuclear fission reactor, right? There's no acknowledgement of the simple fact that biology creates elements. And the easiest example of that is the chicken egg. Like they've done measurements where they've looked at how much the chicken is consuming, and they found that the amount of calcium that's in the chicken's diet is less than what is in the shell, let alone what the chicken needs for its own bones.
Yeah.
So that means that calcium for the shell, which it's primarily calcium, has to be coming from somewhere. So the chicken is consuming things, and then somehow biologically fusing them together to create an element, which we're told is impossible. So I believe that the mainstream periodic table of elements is accurate enough that it can be used for the production of different things, but it's skewed in a way that throws us off the real nature of reality. And I think it's closer to somebody like Walter Russell's ideas about the periodic table. And then just a last point, and then I'll pass the mic back to you. We have monatomics in our bloodstream, in our bodies, right? We have monatomic gold, we have monatomic silver. The part contains the whole, right? As the whole cliche, as above, so below, as within, so without. We have everything in us, and that's kind of the idea behind homeopathy. Also, is like you're energetically affecting the body because everything contains everything. So we have these monatomics. Well, if you hit a body or a tree with an incredible force, like a Lichtenberg figure would, like what would be needed to create one of those, then all of those elements that are not burned away are going to align themselves along the line of current. So we're told that sap is petrified, or that amber is petrified sap. I don't believe that. I think that, first of all, it's a 2.5 on the hardness scale, on the Mohs scale, right? You can dent amber with your fingernail. What would it look like if it was turned to stone? And that's where we get into the work of Hangman 1128. He's showing that the sap petrifies into varying types of quartz depending on the tree. Sap can come in any color, right? You've got green, red, all kinds of stuff. There are quartz crystals like what you're holding there that grow, right? And you can grow crystals in a laboratory very quickly. Like you can grow a big crystal in as little as like 40 or 50 days with the right nutrients. And so that's different from what I'll show later as we get into the presentation. But the idea being, where do they find gold and silver? They find them in quartz seams. So they go looking for the quartz, which would be the sap, right? And then what do they find in the quartz seams? They find gold veins and silver veins. So, and these are also typically like in a fractal kind of a shape. So I think what's happening is that there's a transmutation of elements. I don't think that the old trees that eventually petrified were growing the metal inside of them. I think that it coalesced into these lines of current as it was being petrified.
So many interesting things. And yeah, obviously I've got some quartz crystal up on my desk. I interview some of these new agey people and they're like, well, it's good to have around for the signals and all this. And I don't feel anything, but I think they're kind of cool. And, I look at this and I'm trying to think of it like open-mindedly about potential of it being something else or having been something else. But I mean, they have these crystal growing kits for kids. And like you say, it's something different. So I guess it is something different, but that's kind of one of the ones that's hard for me to wrap my head around. But another thing I just wanted to point out for people is you talk about the hard-boiled egg theory. And that is a really great way to think about just the simple process of heat turning liquid biomaterial into a solid state. I mean, it's not exactly a rock, but the white of the egg and the yolk is transformed by just a little bit of heat for 5 minutes. Think about heat that's 100 times hotter. Think about a lightning strike or something. What could it do? I think it's compelling. I think that's a great entry point into, well, just a simple heat can transform aspects of biological material into something that's hardly recognizable, but yet we take it for granted because we know about eggs.
Yeah, I was finding these heart stones, that were matching up with anatomy to a high degree of specificity, and they should not have been, based on what we're taught, because we're told that a stone like this is just a broken fragment of a larger structure that banged around in a river bottom and through water and acid rain or different kinds of erosion. Eventually it took on this shape. That's all well and good until that shape starts to be highly specific and matching anatomy and scalable, from little to big, and very, very repeatable to high degree of specificity, then that idea of it being a broken fragment of something larger kind of gets thrown out the window. And so I couldn't understand it, because a lot of people were asking me, like, what was it? Was it a widespread sacrifice where they removed the organs and petrified them? I'm like, no, I don't know how it happened, but eventually I came up with boiled egg theory, which if you think about the chest and abdominal cavities, you have the heart and the lungs are in there and the liver and all the other organs, and they're all suspended in water, right? They're floating around and anchored in place. And then the cavities themselves are big fatty containers. And I was like, wow, that's like a pressure cooker. And what happens when you use a pressure cooker? You need less heat for less time. So if you have a pressure cooker and you use a lot of heat for more time, what's that going to do to whatever's inside? And it's very interesting, because we see what happens with eggs, but if you cook an egg too quick, too fast, it starts to leak out and the protein escapes because the shell is rigid. But the heart has the thickest of the fatty sacs that surrounds it. It's called the pericardium, and that's flexible to accommodate for the contraction of the heart while we're alive. But when we die, everything goes into rigor mortis, and the heart being a muscle, it also hardens. So if you think of the heart as being roughly the size of your fist, right? It has form that you've got the ventricles, you've got this tapering in, you've got the big blood vessels that are coming out of the top, the aorta and the vena cava. You have a whole bunch of features that are, very specific, and when heated up to a high degree, could very well harden like that. So I don't have an experiment where I've turned hearts to stone, but Analog sent me an article of, or several articles that had to do with petrified hearts. And one guy who was a subscriber on my channel, he had his Australian Ridgeback dog passed away, and he created this pyre to burn, to cremate the dog. And it was 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, 6 feet high, and it burned for 36 hours. And he saw my videos and he was like, this is mind blowing, because after the fire was all burned out, he went to like pour water on it just to make sure there were no embers that were still aglow. And the only thing that survived that fire was the heart. And he said that it had hardened to a high degree. So it's interesting. You've got that chest and abdominal cavity, you got the pressure, you have the protective layer of the pericardium. And imagine, a plasma strike, lightning, but sustained and way more powerful than our typical lightning strikes. That could easily burn away the outer portions of the body. And aside from plasma, there's also pyroclastic flows, which are said to reach temperatures of up to 1500 degrees Celsius and can travel at the speed of sound. So if you go into a hot sauna and you blow on your arm, you can almost burn your arm because the blowing isn't going to cool it down. It actually heats things up, right? So when you get to those higher temperatures, super high winds with super high heat, that could easily annihilate a body like ours in short order.
Very interesting. So I have to ask you about this because we're talking about the hearts thing. There's a longer video on your channel. I didn't get to watch it in time, but I wanted to ask you about it anyway. About 4 years ago, you posted this. A big thank you to all who have been patiently and eagerly awaiting the results of the laboratory testing of the heart stones. The results are in, and tonight we'll have a thorough and long go through the results and their implications. Paradigm crushed. Well, that sounds exciting. What were some of the results of the tests?
Yeah, well, I had a run-in, you could say, with a couple of guys, and I sent stones to them. I put out a video before that called Exciting Research Day, because they reached out to me seemingly in good faith, because they were curious. They'd seen the videos and wondered about them and wondered if I might be willing to send them some stones to have analyzed at a laboratory that was being run by one of the two guys. And I thought, absolutely, because in a previous stream, I had literally asked for that. And I said, if anyone knows anybody, I'd like to, continue this research and get some actual data. I didn't know what the conclusions were going to be, but I'm going to be intellectually honest about it and, sent them off. They offered to pay me for the stones and I declined. I just wanted the data. Yeah, I can show you the actual report that I got back, and you can decide for yourself whether it has any merit. But
sure.
I had an initial conversation with the first of the two guys that lasted about 45 minutes. And he asked if he could record the call. And I've said, sure. I had nothing that to hide or anything to worry about. So we had that conversation. And then, I don't know, 6 weeks later or something, the two of them had a conversation discussing the results of the testing. And they recorded that conversation as well. So I received both of those audio files, and then I received the supposed lab results, and I was shocked and astonished. This was supposedly a reputable laboratory with a guy who is highly respected, and they just gave me the runaround. They didn't conduct a single experimentation or examination on the stone. It was all just looking at them and drawing conclusions. And then, I mean, I'll show it because it's absolutely a travesty what these two guys did. So I realized, okay, either these guys are just, they have a vested interest in this, or, I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I took those audio files and I broke them down sentence by sentence, because obviously we're talking about some pretty technical terms. And a lot of times when you get into anatomy, you've got your Latin there. And so I wanted people to understand that these ideas aren't really that complicated. The things that they're claiming about the stones, we can look at that. I can show you with stones. I can show you all of these different features, and you can decide for yourself, who makes more sense. And so that video is unfortunately 3 hours long because 90 minutes of it is me going through the audio. And they're talking about something, and then I bring up visuals. So you don't have to be an expert in any of this to examine that, with discernment and decide for yourself who makes more sense. But when you see the actual report, it's a joke.
Fair enough. So it's not so much that the data told us anything conclusive, but it's more
there
about
was
the
no
behavior.
Data. I didn't get a single number.
So it's more about the behavior of these guys that was telling to you, because it was so.
And then they started insinuating that I might be in it for the money. And they're talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect. And they're talking about cherry picking. And they're talking about all of these supposed mistakes that I had made as I approached this topic. And it was very clear they hadn't even bothered to watch any of my videos on the subject before contacting me, because I had addressed every one of those things from the very first video I made on the subject. And I had, visual evidence for everything that I was talking about. So it was really a disappointment. Oh, and then the follow-up was this guy. He titles a video "Paradigm Crushed," like uses the same title as mine.
Gotcha.
It's a 3-hour video, and it's him standing in a field wearing a white lab coat with his cane, talking in a southern drawl and just mocking me. And it's one logical fallacy after another. He doesn't address any of the data or any of the things that I brought up in the video. It's 15 minutes long. He's sitting with a buddy in a field on two folding chairs, and they're just basically laughing about how stupid I was and how I could arrive at these conclusions. So
frustrating. It's like, look, just cut open the fucking rock. Cut open the goddamn rock and let's look at it.
Yeah, well, I thought they were going to do spectroscopy. That was the whole reason I sent the rocks off, or at least, some other forms of analysis, so I could at least start to find out what are the constituent elements that are comprising these stones. And so instead, all I got was a story and a survey, which I'll show in a little bit.
So you clearly know a little bit about the heart, and I've seen you talk about this before. It's not just that the outside looks like a heart. The actual connection points are all where they should be. It looks like, like a Frankenstein stitch down the side, but this is how our heart is pieced together. And so when you look at it in rock formation, that's what you see. Fossilization is not controversial. My dad used to have a little fossil of a fish on his desk. That's basically very adjacent to what we're talking about. It's not really considered odd at all. We're just talking about the speed in which this happens, and that it might happen in other ways than we're told. And we're going to get deeper into this, but to kind of cap out this first hour, and then towards the end of the thing, I think the best way to do it is talk about the couple questions I have about the book, just so they can be kind of bookended on to the first hour so people can hear that too. But I guess I want to know what are your big questions left with this material, and how do you fold the implications of all these things into like your big picture of reality in the past and what this world is?
Well, if we're not in some kind of a simulation, a matrix, and I operate under the belief, the assumption that we're not, that there's a physical reality, and then there's this like artificial overlay that we get through our black mirrors in the form of brainwashing and programming. And so I think that we live in a creative realm. I'm not coming at it from a Christian perspective at all, but I do believe that the fingerprints of the Creator can be found everywhere if you just have the eyes to see it. And we've been blinded to that obvious fact. The geometry that exists throughout everything. It's like we're told that this all happened through random chance, that there's a big bang, things bump around, and then, as Rob Skiba once said, we go from goo to you by way of the zoo. And that's what they want us to believe with all these theories of evolution. And obviously adaptation takes place, but evolution as a theory has a lot of holes in it.
Well, let me say, my theory for reality, and I still don't know anything to be true, but many different books and researchers and cosmologies from all over seem to overlap in this idea that there's a higher realm of symbols and archetypes and spirits and angels, some kind of like ethereal forms, an ethereal place where really our consciousness is actually likely to be broadcasted from. And it's all projected down here in an illusionary physical realm that feels deceptively solid and real. That's what a range of sources seem to suggest. And if that's true, then really nothing is off the table. There really aren't like solid, eternal physical laws that can never be violated. Maybe Titans did walk the earth, I guess. I mean, how many myths start with giant animals or beings of some kind? What I've been told is that the earliest rituals, my buddy Gordon White, big into magic, he says the earliest religious rites and rituals were done to a snake god that they just imagined formed the physical world. And a lot of times, you're talking about a spirit form. You're talking about like Mother Ayahuasca appears as a snake. And I think, some people might say, well, you're literalizing something, but the story goes back thousands and thousands of years. So what conclusions can we make about it? I'm just saying that there are stories about giant creatures and Quetzalcoatl type things, feathered serpents and all sorts of things. Maybe there's a way in which they were real. Maybe the configuration of the earth was completely different, or whatever this thing is. That's not even controversial. They say dinosaurs walked the earth. They couldn't live today because why? The environment was fucking different. That's what the mainstream will tell you. So let's just scale that up or adjust it slightly. And things that sound mystical and impossible actually don't anymore.
Well, the mainstream, narrative when it comes to Titans is they couldn't have existed because they would have such a gravitational pull because of their mass. They would collapse under their own weight. But that assumes that what we've been taught about gravity is true, and that the Einsteinian gravity that we have, which was, superseded the Newtonian gravity of mass attracting mass, and now is a warpy, bendy space-time continuum that was hypothesized by Einstein, and many have concluded that, it's never actually been proven to be true. Our whole entire cosmological model is based on all of that. And so they say that that's why these trees couldn't have existed, even though the remnants of them are everywhere, but we've been blinded to the truth of that, right? In my opinion, it's self-evident when you see it, and if you know what a tree looks like, and you see a tree break down in the forest, you can see the qualities that the tree exhibits and how it looks when it starts to become the forest floor instead of a tree, and all the stages in between. All of that can be seen, but on a far, far greater scale. So there's so much there to examine, but we've been blinded to the potential truth of it. And I think that's all by design. I mean, you mentioned magic and wizards. I think, ultimately we live in a realm that's being run by dark magicians, and they've convinced everyone that magic isn't real. and because they turn us into muggles that way, right? If you don't believe in magic, you know, you're not going to be able to do it, you know.
Cheers.
And I've seen children that can read blindfolded, play chess, catch, you know, do all kinds of stuff with my own eyes on more than one occasion. There are people teaching children how to do this now. It's undeniable what they're able to do. So we have faculties that we haven't even begun to unlock because we've all been dumbed down about the nature of our reality.
Yes, well said. I do agree with you there. So let me ask you a little more about the trees, because the trees are one of the things that is still like a head scratcher to me. I kind of can't really accept it. I can acknowledge that the stump looks like a tree stump, sure. And I also can acknowledge that for most of human history, we couldn't see the top of this stump, and now we can with drones and stuff. And when you go up there and you look at it from the top down, it has rings, like a tree would have rings. And then you go to the conventional geological explanation of how such things would form, and they would say that it would be layering. Well, layering is, those are horizontal lines, not circumference.
Concentric rings.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. One excludes the other.
Yeah, that is odd. But that to me is just it's a question mark, but it's not enough for me to say, exactly. It's not enough for me to say, well, these were trees, because my remaining questions are, well, where is the rest of the tree? Of course, I know you've brought that up. And then my other thing would be like, well, why can't we just get down to the root structure? Why don't we just look at what's under this thing, whether it's ground penetrating radar or something like that? If we have cave systems down there where the roots have kind of, gone away and left cavities and they match the structure of a tree, well, now I'm a little more compelled. But just like you've said, like, well, the questions start to come up. Who cut this tree down? What happened to the tree? Where is the trunk? Was Paul Bunyan real? It's possible. Did Babe the Blue Ox carry it off somewhere? How do you wrestle with those things? Because you look at the stump and you're like, that looks like a tree stump, but make a better case than that for me.
Oh, I can definitely do that, but it's a visual thing. So should I start sharing a screen here?
Yes, let's do it. So let's say we're in the Plus show, and let's say that we tried this before we started, and when I talk, there's a big echo. So I'm just going to shut up and you do your thing.
Okay, so just to give some visuals for what you were just talking about. Let's see. There we go. You see that?
Yes.
No forests on Earth. The geology revived. These are the different ones that I mentioned before, and then this is what we're talking about when it comes to like these tabletop mountains that exist all over the place. Oftentimes they'll have these never-ending waterfalls that are coming from the top that can't be explained with rainfall. And so some of them have flat tops and others look like, tree that just got broken off. And then you can see root structures. And these are just one data point. And that's Jugurtha, which is the one, that's what you were just referring to with the concentric rings. And, it begs the question, who cut them down if they were cut down? And I made a video called Felling Titanic Trees, where I just posit, what if they were using something as primitive as a diamond rope saw? It doesn't have to be some kind of advanced alien technology or lasers or something like that to account for the trees being brought down. And the Bible or the Book of Jasher, I don't remember, they talk about the angels went to work at the trees. They brought them down prior to the great flood because God didn't want the corrupted beings to be able to flee the flood. So that was apparently the purpose for bringing them down, according to the biblical narrative. And then we got Paul Bunyan and Medusa. This is what I was talking about before, all these different photographs that are being shown by people that they see this as unequivocal proof that this was once a face, this was once a foot, etc. And I challenge that. And there's not much in the way of follow-up. So a place like this would be interesting to follow up because you have those eye sockets there that you could get into and examine to see if there's anything that is resembling the anatomy that should be there if it were indeed an eye socket. So this is the Petrified Titans video that I was talking about that Jay Dreamers made and showing this elephant. You see my cursor when I'm moving my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. And so this is the idea that space-time is bending, and we have this thing called the square cube law. And as you double the diameter of something, the volume scales exponentially, which would give you this gravitational pull that would be so great that the bones wouldn't be able to support it. So that's the official story. So I've been looking at all of these subjects for the last 10 years roughly, and what I find is there's some truth to all of them, but people get hung up on their favorite theories and they run with those, and then they start excluding all the other ones, and then you get all this squabbling and questions about the nature of reality and people arguing about it. So I think ultimately what we need to be doing is this sort of thing, cross-disciplinary field research, where we're examining the things and looking at where are the connecting points. And we need to be aware of these kinds of things, which I've already talked about. Pareidolia, apophenia is the same as pareidolia, but when you recognize a pattern that doesn't actually exist. And cherry picking is what they would claim I've done with the heartstones. Dunning-Kruger effect is when you think you know a lot about something, but you've only just begun to look into it. So these are the kinds of pitfalls. But I'm a big fan of proper application of the scientific method when it's not, being used with logical fallacies, which seems to be pretty common in this day and age. We talked about the heliocentric model, and this becomes the justification for our Earth timelines, where we talk about the Earth being 4+ billion years old, and these great dyings off that occurred, the mass extinctions, which we talked about, the last of them being the dinosaurs. And this is the sedimentary layering model. And you can see these numbers are getting very large the further down you go, 400, 500 million years. And so we talked about the cycle of petrogenesis, and that's how they say that all of these structures came about. So now we get to Devil's Tower, and looks a heck of a lot like a tree stump. Might not be, but all of the mainstream theories are that this is lava that got pushed up. The Earth used to be up here 50 million years ago, and then there was some kind of a rapid cooling event that caused the lava to expand as it cooled, and that is where we get those honeycomb columns from, which I'll show photos of in a moment. So the ancients had a completely different view. They talked oftentimes about the world tree, the cosmic egg theories. There's all sorts of continents that are missing now on our current maps that used to be on the older maps. And then we get a lot of truth drops in Hollywood in the form of giant, trees and Avatar. And I think that this, may just be speaking to something inside the collective unconscious, where we actually have memories of this time in the past that once existed. And so there are a number of terms that have been used: the plasma apocalypse, the EMCO event, the electromagnetic plasma changeover event. It's been referred to as the Phoenix event. And I think when it comes to Phoenix and Medusa, we're probably talking about anthropomorphizations of a plasma event that they're giving human qualities, and that's what is surviving in our legends. And maybe that's how they, if this information is being actively suppressed, then maybe it's through story and legend that they're able to keep it alive. But this is lava. This is what it does. It never makes a straight line ever. It's all amorphous and just kind of globular and flowing around. And then we're told that this is being formed from that. And that's a great story, but they can't actually show it happening because it happened millions of years ago. They can't reproduce it in any kind of a laboratory experiment. And if you just look at it, it kind of defies the narrative, in my opinion. You have this honeycomb pattern, and then you even have a greater honeycomb pattern. And this is exactly how different kinds of plant life form. They have these fractal-like patterns to their fibers. And even if you bought the cooling lava narrative, how do you explain something like this, where it's just like a diagonal straight line? Couldn't have been formed by a glacier because this bit is over here untouched. So it's just lots of things that make you go, additional data points, right? You get this swirling, that fibers do this, right? And even if you buy that in the mainstream narrative, I'm going to show a whole bunch of stuff now that makes it really hard to buy that narrative. Like, how does this come about from some rapid cooling? That looks far more biological than geological, in my opinion. And here's another example of the hexagonal columns, but look, it's got these circles in the center. How does that come about? Through rapid cooling lava. Doesn't make any sense. But even if you think it does, explain this to me. Like, these are, I'm going to show places all over the world that, and these pictures are pre-AI. I gathered these years ago, and they've been in many of my presentations. So it's not just me, pulling fun photographs out of the AI engines. So this has a very biological look to it. It looks like cellular and blood. And is it? I don't know. But, it's something to ponder. And I'll show video of that site in a moment. These are called concretions. And, they'll have their mainstream narratives for how these form. But is it possible that maybe this is formed through some kind of plasma event, or these are seeds of a great tree, or there's a lot of different possibilities, but I'm not attached to any of them. I'm just looking at it as information. And then if you look at all this micro layering and you see how it's swirling and going up into this area that almost looks like a cell structure and continuing in, I can't even begin to imagine how that formed. But what I can tell you is it didn't form through dead animal and plant life laying down over millions of years of time. It just doesn't make any sense. This is a white pocket in, I believe, Arizona. And again, it has a very, very biological look to it. And sometimes things look like things, and other times they don't. But this is the sedimentary layering. And then this is what I was talking about before. This happened in 3 hours when Mount St. Helens erupted. And
as the grains were being propelled over the surface in a slurry.
Do you hear the sound?
Yes, actually, I was just going to say that I already took a note that I wanted to make sure I included this, even if it had to be in my wrap-up or something, because I find this to be really compelling to have a geologist expert having his paradigm blown live in this footage.
Slurry, the particles separated coarse and fine into thin layers. I had thought that a catastrophe would mix up all the particles and make a homogenized deposit. Boy, was I wrong. Right here, a pyroclastic flow moving at freeway speed or higher can separate particles into coarse and fine. So layering doesn't require millions of years, thousands of years, or even hundreds of years. It can form rapidly in this slurry flow process. So Mount St. Helens tells us something really interesting about how rapidly strata can form. There's even micro-thin lamination in this deposit. It's remarkable.
Right. So even petrified trees as well. This is the mountain we were discussing before. You can see the eye socket here, and I'll get into more detail with that. I want to be cognizant of the time, and you asked questions about the trees. So let me come back to the mountain and just skip straight to some of the best data when it comes to the trees. But first, I want to show a couple things when it has to do with petrification. Like, petrification is an indisputed fact, right? We've got all of these examples in the fossil record. We talked about the different experiments that can be done. They can make it petrified wood in a laboratory in 24 hours that's indistinguishable from naturally occurring petrified wood, even when looking under a microscope. These are different anomalous examples of petrified brain. And my theories early on were that anything that was fat would petrify to quartz, just like sap petrifies to quartz. And so you can see here, this chunk is broken away and it's quartz inside. So that's perfectly in alignment. Our body makes stones. We have gallstones, kidney stones. Cows and horses create bezoars, which can be the size of baseballs. And when you do cross sections of them, they look exactly like geodes. So we have all kinds of anomalous examples of things petrified that shouldn't be, and at least not with the time frames that we've been given. Things like jellyfish, which don't have any bones at all, that have petrified in full detail, with all their glory. Fish consuming another fish. And then when it comes to things like stalactites and stalagmites in caves, we're told that they're forming at something like 50 to 100 years per centimeter because of accumulation of mineral. And take a look at this.
I'm about to show you 5 different examples of rock forming quickly. Then I'm going to ask you a question about a dinosaur bone I'm going to show at the end. From Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic, mineralized water went through these pipes and formed this in 80 years. Here's a spark plug in stone, no more than 20 to 40 years to form this. This little guy right here was put into a mineral springs in Karlovy Vary, and within just 6 weeks, it turned to stone. And this right here, this is the same material you find in stalactites and stalagmites in those caves that they say are millions of years old. This right here took 6 months to form. Here's the question. Here's a dinosaur vertebrae. If these right here can form in that length of time, anywhere between weeks to months to years, how long does it take to fossilize a dinosaur bone? If the creationists are right, then it's 4,500 years, no older. What do you think?
Yeah. So obviously this is probably a 200 million year old rear differential. And then this gets into the question of why do things petrify? We've talked about these different possibilities, transmutation of elements and, artificial diamonds. This is Lake Natron in Tanzania. Animals fall in and they get encased in these high mineral content waters. And the longer they're there, the more solid they become. The same thing happens with Mother Shipton's Cave in the UK, where people go and hang objects, and within 6 months, they're hardened. This is what I was talking about before with the Lichtenberg figures, the fractal that forms as plasma is burning its way through different objects. And this is what that looks like over a volcano, these incredible plasma storms. And then you have the Lichtenberg figures that we talked about. And they're telling us that this tree-like pattern is being formed by massive small rivulets that are then converging into larger and larger channels. And I reject the notion. And when you look at, this is a photograph of the largest plasma storm ever recorded, and it's right over a volcano that's got a bunch of ash. So imagine 1,000 volcanoes going off at the same time. Is it possible that plasma storms could have occurred that are big enough to create something like the Grand Canyon? I mean, if we do live under a dome and it works like a lens, this is a Fresnel's lens that can literally in a matter of seconds start to melt stone. It's just astonishing what can be done with just light alone, let alone some other technology. There's all kinds of examples of man-made petrification, petrified wood created in labs, growing opals. We talked about that. Coalification, biochar. The interesting thing about both biochar and coal is that the biochar is created in an airless environment, right? Or at least as little air as possible. So it's very possible that the coal seams that are being mined around the world are the former root structures of these giant trees, because if they got hit and burned, then the roots themselves are going to be underground, so they're gonna burn in an airless environment. So that would turn to coal. We talked about some of those other things, and this is a scientist in the 1800s in Italy. He had the secret to petrifying flesh. He could petrify anything. There's museums with his work still in them. And there were 2 other Italian scientists, Paolo Guarini and another guy that could also petrify things. And their secrets died with them. These are bog bodies that if you, a bog is like a peat bog, which is highly acidic waters. And when the body falls in, it does a very peculiar thing. It dissolves bone and it dissolves muscle, but it causes the organs to harden. So you end up with a skin sac with a bunch of hardened organs. So if you think of things like lymph nodes, our heart, our lungs, our kidneys, all of these as being potential stones, then that's just an interesting phenomenon. I didn't know this until I began this research, but opal comes from wood, right? It's just silica infused wood. These are petrified acorns. They formed in a year. They were sent to me by one of my subscribers. There was a bucket that was under the awning of the house, and the mineral water was basically like pouring into this bucket, and they sat for a year and turned to stone. This is Nightlight in Sky, I think, or I always forget the name of the channel, but you mentioned it before. He's mixing chromium oxide and aluminum oxide in a votive with a little bit of steel wool, 10 seconds in a microwave with the plasma of the magnetron, and you get raw ruby from that fluoresce as it should under a black light. So these are all things that should just make you go, each one is not proof of anything in and of itself, but they're important data points. So yeah, many roads to petrification. I've talked about those now. And we talked about the why the lie. And I think it's quite simply to hide resources and hide the nature of our reality from us. And there's gold in them. There are trees, right? That's where they're finding it, is in the sap seams of the old trees. So what is this place? Maybe it's a lot bigger. This is some old map that suggests that there's a whole lot of continents beyond ours. If this realm is flat, I don't know what the shape is, but I didn't realize that this one on the right is petrified wood. This is opalized wood. It's just silica infused and absolutely glorious and beautiful. And here you can see obsidian being polished, and obsidian is also from tree, not in the mainstream narrative, but you can see the micro layering. And I've got a photograph later that shows the in-between stages. This is copper in its native form. And these are examples of the petrified forests that I talked about that were being harvested. And here's the examples of the different articles that were sent to me by Ben. And they were getting all these metals from the trees. So clearly the trees used to have metal in them. And maybe it came about the way that I was talking, with some kind of a transmutation of elements. There's an interesting drawing of, this is the Giza Plateau. And you've got these pyramids, and interestingly enough, they all look to be sitting on top of stumps. So this is said to be the largest petrified tree in the world. And if you look at petrified trees and you look at all the detail and how they manifest in every way from the small, and then you extrapolate up, this is what we're talking about. Yeah. There were times where I couldn't tell the difference between what was wood and what was stone until I picked it up. And this was an example of that. I was like, that looks like wood.
So magnificent.
This is in the Black Hills of South Dakota.
In the flesh.
Not far from Rushmore.
Firsthand.
But you can see all the micro layering. The color is still there in the wood.
Doesn't do this.
You can break away pieces and it's darker inside. Fibrous as well.
I think you'll be able to really.
And just like we have scabs, the sap is the scab for the tree, right? When the tree is injured in any way, it creates this block in the form of, it's like a coagulation, right? So
gaps.
These pieces here, if you imagine them in a regular sized tree today, they'd be something that you could fit between your thumb and forefinger. And you can see, unless you're blinded by the paradigm, that it is tree and it exhibits all of the detail of tree in every way. And I've even got an example, which is coming up, I think, showing that like you could break away a piece and it's showing all the grain underneath. But if you take these and you polish them, the color comes alive. So it's, and I filmed this myself. This is just amazing to see up close. What doesn't come out is that there's a lot of silver and shine. It doesn't come out in the photography, unfortunately, but when you're there in person, it is just absolutely breathtaking. And I wave my hand there to show that it cleaves when it breaks, and you can see the breakage. And this is exactly what wood does when it breaks. And that's the part I was talking about The oxidized portion has been removed, and you can see it looks like fresh wood underneath. So that's what we're talking about.
Amazing. And I don't want to lose the audio only listeners, but this stuff is pretty compelling.
Yeah. So here's obsidian, and you can see like in between here, it's still exhibiting like the grain, and here it's vitrified, or another word for that would be glassified. So you've got these in between stages, and then people take chunks of this and polish it, and it shows all of this beautiful grain that catches the light because it's still got some of those other features. So things like turquoise and opal are also coming from the tree. They're finding it in these areas, and then but they're not seeing the bigger picture, which is that they're, that where that colorful stuff is embedded is actually just part of a larger structure that is also exhibiting the details of tree. So this is just talking about the geodes again, infinite variety of outcomes depending on what you start with. How could it be missed by so many? And this is a point that I forgot to make before, is that geologists are not anatomists. That's a rare combination of skill set, right? That like a doctor goes on to become a geologist. So the vast majority of geologists are not going to notice this stuff because they're not trained to see it, because they haven't studied anatomy, like with the stone that I found in the river, which I'll show in a moment. But we've got all kinds of examples of going back to steampunk days, mining on a scale that's hard to fathom. This is the biggest mine in the world. So what were they mining? What if that was just one big tree stump and it's got all these precious elements in it? And this is where it gets really interesting, is when, and again, each of these are just data points, right? But taken as a whole, it starts to be a very compelling, cohesive picture. Like these are salt mines here that are found in Romania and Poland. These are marble caves that are in Patagonia. And again, we were talking about the concentric rings. How does this happen in a sedimentary layering model? I mean, they'll come up with an excuse, a reason. But the question is, how many far-fetched excuses do you find yourself buying in order to be able to justify the paradigm? And how many are just like, oh, wow, it actually might appear to be what it is, right? This is, again, this is Patagonia, but take a look at these sites. This is either Poland or Romania, and you can see all of the detail of the grain of the tree and the knots, and it's just phenomenal that this stuff is like hidden in plain sight, but we're all blinded to it because we've been taught all of these stories about the nature of reality. So if that wasn't convincing enough, you got places like this, and then check this out.
Yeah, what I'm looking at looks exactly like a live edge giant dinner table. Same grain, you know what I mean?
Yeah, with all the knots and the complexity and the detail and the fine micro layering, it's just it's astonishing. So when then there are all these kinds of anomalous things. This is called banded iron, where you get this like one color and then it goes to red, then it goes to white, then it goes to red, and it's like it's sandwiching, and it's just repeating over and over again. So we're being told and taught that this is coming about because of this layering of creature. Well, okay, how do you explain these swirls? And this is in Petra, Jordan, and not these two, but this particular one. And when you start to see this stuff through new eyes, my belief is that they carved into this stuff while it was still fresh. Like the trees were brought down, and then before the Great Flood came, all of the life that was thriving in and on the trees had to exist somewhere, and they continued to do it in the trees. So they had their primitive tools and carved in. It's one possibility. But when you see it from the inside, it starts to be more like a plausibility, because you can see the phenomenal detail of the grain.
Mm-hmm. And for the listeners, you're talking about, which exists all around the world, these dwellings that look like they're carved out of rock. And you're saying, well, at a time, they might have been carved out of wood. and more like treehouse towns, and they just formed into stone over time, and we look at them now and we wonder how it was done.
Yeah. And then we talked about amber. I'm going to show some sap stuff here in a moment, but this begs the question, then if this was true, then you got to start looking at all the mountains with new eyes. And so I'm showing wingsuit footage here of people flying through some of the most amazing mountainous terrains in the world. And it looks exactly like tree rain. And they want us to believe that that sedimentary layering that has jutted upward, it should be horizontal, but it's vertical now because the tectonic plates have whacked together and formed our mountains. Or it was once a tree that petrified, and now we are seeing the remains of that. So here's some really compelling images showing that this is clearly petrified tree. And the mainstream narratives for how that formed, I think, are laughable at this point. You can see like that's clearly a knot in tree. This is a 4 foot wide ball of sap. It's absolutely beautiful. So I recommend going to the Black Hills and trying to find some of these sites. But like I said, sap can come in any color. It can be red, it can be green. Here's a tree that's bleeding metal. So if this were to petrify, maybe it would lead to something like seams of metal. Then you have this sort of thing, trees that are gushing like fire hydrants. There's loads of videos of this particular phenomenon. Well, if you were to scale that up to a gigantic tree, what would that look like? Well, the channels that water would be going through might look like this. And interestingly enough, we've got these guys called the Action Adventure Twins. They have a big channel and they're spelunking these deep crevices that go down 500-600 feet and then snake off in a direction, and then they go down another 500 or 600 feet. So it's pretty phenomenal when you see like these trees just gushing water like they are, and then you ponder the possibility that people talk about a LiDAR study that supposedly proved that there was a root structure below Devil's Tower, but I've never found the study, so it could just be a rumor. But regardless, we do have this evidence, which these guys have found many sites around North America that look very biological and very much like the inside of a tree. And you can see all the layering that's just like a tree. And then getting back to lava, or not lava, but to lava tubes and coal seams and that sort of thing. These are lava tubes said to be formed by lava, coming out of the volcanoes. Well, how do you get concentric rings and bifurcation of channels from lava just pushing? And if you look here at the end, you see most of these are going horizontal, like this one. And then, let me go back. There, you can see it's going an entirely different direction. So again, they'd probably have an explanation for how that comes about, but it's obviously different, this one, than the last one. So tepuis, another big data point, look like tree stumps, never-ending waterfalls coming from the top. This is in Venezuela, I believe. Angel Falls, the tallest waterfall in the world. It's definitely not coming from rainfall. But what do they call these wells, or these water sources? They call them artesian wells. So art being artery, just like we have flow in our veins and arteries. So again, I think the answer. Probably I need to fix that. That's just a kind of a primer for the trees. There's so much more than what I shared.
I love it. We'll just throw out a few thoughts, because this was lengthy. Man, the spark plug in stone is super interesting to me. It makes me think about Michael Cremo's work in forbidden archaeology and all these tools that are embedded in stone and they shouldn't be there. That's why he calls it forbidden archaeology. But it's like, so if you have a petrified hammer or axe handle in stone. I don't know. It's just odd because we're thinking Bronze Age, Iron Age, Stone Age, and this is just drilled into our heads that it's really hard to unravel. But to show a spark plug in stone like that, and obviously that's not an ancient spark plug. So these things can happen way faster than described. And I don't know, it just makes me Michael Cremo's work sticks out to me as like, man, I got to go back and read that book with these new eyes and see how strange some of this stuff really is. The
Antikythera.
Yeah, that thing. It's like, well, how old is that really? If Atlantis was real, is it only a couple thousand years old? Everything's crazy. And then some of the footage you showed of what looks like a tree, but we're told is a rock. It makes me think about when I've gone through the Pacific Northwest and stuff, and you just see new trees or new saplings, new life springing out of rock. It's like, well, that's not supposed to happen because the roots need something to attach to, and they need to be able to get water and all this. But when you think of it as a petrified tree that they're growing out of, it's, I don't know, a little more.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of the sequoias, they would have been like moss up against these big trees. That's how big we're talking. You know, it's like it's pretty wild. You know, going back to the instant petrification thing and the ruby experiment, I was taught in school that it you know, a lump of coal under 1 million pounds of pressure for 1 million years formed a diamond, but we can create artificial diamonds in laboratories and artificial rubies, and so this is something that is happening in a matter of seconds, mixing powders together. We're getting ruby is the second hardest after diamond. It's a 9 on the Mohs hardness scale, right? So that's kind of anomalous, you know, and it just a lot of things that make you go, and when taken as a whole, you find that they all line up in favor of the big tree hypothesis, which they shouldn't. It should require mental gymnastics if there was nothing to the story, that, you know, you're kind of warping and bending your theories to match your evidence rather than it just lining up perfectly. So that's what I mean. Like, I did extensive research on the mountain, you know, with all these 50 plus correlations, but I'm actually more confident about the trees and the heartstones than I am about the mountain, because I look at that thing all the time and I'm just like, how can it be? You know, it's like other people are far more convinced than I am. So
I do want to let you go through another section of this presentation. I'm looking at the clock. We want to talk about the book, so I'm not going to step on you. I want you to be able to present that. And then I also just want to say to listeners, we're going to try to be conscious that you're a listener, not a viewer, but we also want to just let you know that you can watch this presentation for free on his YouTube channel. He gave it live at Anarcho Poco's satellite conference.
Liber Poco. Yeah.
Liber Poco. It's one of the most recent videos on the channel. Check that out if you want. But yes, please hit us with another.
My playlist, you know, a lot of my best presentations have just been done live because I've got all my tabs open and all my, you know, video clips and everything. And I'm just going through each one of these different topics that I'm talking about as, you know, potentially a presentation in and of itself. So it is highly visual. It's rooted in empirical finds. It's not just a theory tale that I'm running off on. And trust me, bro, there's way more to it than that. And if I'm wrong about this stuff, it's almost weirder in my mind because it's like then we're in some kind of a simulation or who knows what.
That was going to be one of my, like, if I was trying to look for a mundane explanation, I would say, well, it does seem like we have these codes like the Fibonacci sequence or the phi ratio, and reality structures itself this way. And whether it's a sunflower or a mountain or the structure of a human being. I mean, I've interviewed people like Marty Leeds, who goes through all the phalanges and all the ratios of the body and says, like, this is divine proportion. This is the structure of everything. So many points in your finger at the horizon is like a match for where the sun is. Like from the from the visuals of your eye to the sun, there's some kind of like ratio to the hand. So if I was going to try to say, well, what could this be? There's a possible explanation somewhere in there that, well, cavities in mountains form like cavities in the body because the earth is always growing. God's creation is always growing. And these are the
Right.
blueprints for that growth. And it doesn't matter what material it is. So that's a possible angle.
There are two things that they would use along that line that to dismiss the idea, and one is the doctrine of signatures, and that's that
There you go.
Things look like things, right? So you have flowers that look like monkey faces, right? There is like this kind of repeatability throughout our reality, that just because it looks like a monkey's face doesn't mean it's a monkey, right? So that's the doctrine of signatures. Then there's also Rupert Sheldrake's idea of morphogenic resonance, is that there is this kind of repeatability of pattern that exists throughout our reality. And I have no problem with that, because I believe ultimately we live in a fractal holographic, experience. And I got turned on to those ideas from Talbot's book long ago, and they still resonate with me because you can see that from the macro to the micro, is that there is a repetition. But maybe that repetition is because we have biology that was originally far larger, and we've been downsized. And if you think about like a snowflake growing, the complexity of the snowflake comes at the very end, when the fractal is at its smallest, right? We have the initial central portion is these larger branches, and then it branches off into smaller and smaller. So that might be what's happening in our realm, and it accommodates a larger number of people or life, if that were the case. And there's definitely, as Ben has shown, a plethora of evidence for. There's so much evidence for the former existence of giants as well, not just titans. So
you have two more potential things. One is about the Mammoth Mountain, and what's the other one about?
The Heartstones, just showing some of the visual evidence. How much time do we have?
I mean, we're really not on a super strict time limit. I believe my wife is picking the kids up from school and going to Busch Gardens to give us free reign. I believe that's the case. Hit us with the mammoth, because that is just wild.
I'll hit you with the mammoth next. Okay, here I already showed these photographs. So this is the full size, and then you've got the Google Earth images that I was using Google Earth as a drone, because this is a national park, and you're not allowed to fly drones. But already looking at it from above, I could see that like there's these curved sections where the head would meet the shoulder. It appeared like there was a spine. It looks like the remains of a rib cage. Well, this is just the skirt of the mountain, and that's just the erosion, they would say. But there's also like this deep canyon here between where legs would be. There's a properly placed eye. And it's like, okay, there's already a lot there just looking at it from the macro view. So I was thinking of interesting questions, formulating hypotheses. I got out my anatomy books. I started looking online. What does an elephant skull look like? Oh, well, we have these bone meeting points that are called sutures. This is the eye socket. This is the temporal fossa for one of the chewing muscles. And then we have this little hole right here called the infraorbital foramen that's below the eye. And in elephants, it's more front located. So already looking on Google Earth, as you'll see in a moment, if I go back to, here, this is what I want to show. Okay, so this is not a proper photograph. This is Google Earth, but this hole right here is exactly where, if the head were tilted back, which it appears to be lying on its stomach with the head tilted back, then that would put this hole in front of the eye socket, which already on Google Earth, I could see this. And this is what that looks like looking through. So you can see it has a very biological look to it. So got out the anatomy books and 3D rendering of anatomy to see like where are these bones meeting, because I wanted a laundry list of things that I would expect to find going up to the cave. And when I went up there, it was absolutely mind-blowing, because the first thing that happened was this. So eye socket, this bone meets this bone in a suture, which is this line right here, and you can see it in a little better detail there. and it kind of goes up and jogs. And interestingly enough, in that exact portion of the cave is this structure. This isn't a crack. This is literally like two different overlapping kinds of rock. And it even does that little jog. And that's in this exact place. So now you have to get into odds. Like, what are the odds of that feature being there, looking that way, and in that exact position? Here's the optic fissure of an elephant, and that's where the optic nerve goes. This is that exact portion of the cave. And then when it comes to the eyeball, I hypothesized early on that this was the remains of an eyeball. And it wasn't until later that turned out to potentially be true. So I talked about the ear shape and this quarter moon structure, and I went looking for the name of a road to go up and hike up, because I was like, wow, maybe since the eye is so well preserved, maybe the ear is also preserved. And this structure is in the exact place of where an ear would be. And what I found out as I was searching on Google was that there was a team of geologists and archaeologists who had gone up with ropes and had excavated a cave that was right there in the middle of this structure. And I don't think you're going to have the sound now, but this is, they went in with LiDAR, they 3D mapped it, they'd used 3D photography. There were skeletons up there that they excavated. There were cave paintings showing four-legged creatures with horns and animals falling from the sky. And it's just like, it was literally the Twilight Zone at that point.
For those of you that are just hearing music, he's going into these cavities where the ear canal would be in this mountain, and they're going deep in it.
Yeah, so that's just a little teaser with a bunch of the visuals that I was covering in those first videos. I hypothesized early on that anything that was fat would petrify to varying types of quartz. I went up and was showing some friends this structure, and one of them noticed, which I hadn't because it was so dirty, that the whole back side of that structure that's kind of cresting up like a wave about to crash, which I believed was the remains of the eyeball, that was covered in a 10-inch thick layer of quartz, the whole back side of that. So that would be the petrified sclera, or the white of the eye. And if all of that isn't wild enough, this happened after I made the fourth video of the Unveiling a Titan series. Google Earth was suddenly edited to block out the ear and the eye. And some might say, oh, it's just a rendering glitch, but I have the before footage, which was consistent for at least a couple of years, which you can see there. And then this is the after footage. You can no longer get up and see the mountain with the eye socket and the ear unless you get up real close, and then it starts to open up. And it's pretty clear that has been done by hand, in my opinion.
Right. That kind of manipulation is a huge red flag.
Yeah, a lot of people were on the fence about my theories until that happened. And then they're like, okay, now I'm convinced.
I love how that happens. The cover up makes it worse.
Yeah, often it does. So yeah, the fourth video is all about the tissues of the mountain, where I go in and I look at limestone and I compare that to what we know about the structure of bone and all the different components of bone. Our red blood cells are formed inside of our bones. And we're told that this is all formed from crushed, compressed skeletal remains, forum, mollusk, shellfish that have been compressed over millions of years of time and then pushed upward by tectonic activity. I disproved that by just taking a 1000x microscope to these limestone areas of the mountain. There's no hint of any of those fossils in any of this stone, but what it does match up perfectly with is Titan anatomy. So you get all of these different stones with these Swiss cheese like bifurcations, iron ore, quartz crystal. It's wild. I don't have time to go into all of that, but let me just get to the heartstone stuff. So it all began with this stone. This one stone has 23 different anatomical features, this being the aorta and the vena cava. This is the coronary artery opening, and that's the coronary sulcus. Between the left atrium and the left ventricle, there's this fatty portion I'll show you on Fleshy Hearts in a moment. And so that's already a high degree of specificity there. But it's also white, and everywhere the white is worn away, it's red inside. So there's your pericardium, which is your fatty outer layer. This is what's known as the isthmus in the heart. And this stone right there has this feature. And there's more internally. I went in with endoscopic cameras and I started to catalog all the different features that it had. Now, hearts can take on a lot of different shapes, but they have more or less the same morphology, even though they can be shaped very differently. And here's what I was talking about, that fatty layer, and there's the coronary sulcus. And you can see that each of the hearts has that. So pretty high degree of specificity with a number of the features. So again, thinking of the scientific method, if I can find one, there should be more. So I went out and I started to recognize that there was a reoccurring pattern in the stones. This is early days. These are not so feature filled, but I started to find more and more, and they're highly specific. We talked about the heart not being what we were taught in school. Rudolf Steiner once said that for a person to really mature, there were a few things that they needed to know. And one of those things was that the heart is not a pump. The heart is not pushing blood through the circulatory system. We have all these different colors that the hearts can take on, but they have this fatty outer layer. I started finding them in droves. I broke them open. I had them CAT scanned. I went in with endoscopic cameras, and instead of being smooth from water erosion like you would anticipate, it was rough and bumpy, just like the inside of a heart muscle. I sliced them open. I polished them. And here you can see some of the better ones.
Looks at them, so I'm not the best of preppers. Anyway, this is a new one.
So the top will have the aorta and vena cava, either as an opening
right?
or a
You
crease.
see the lines there. But this is also a new one. Got this yesterday out at sunset for a little less than an hour. I got about a half a dozen of them. But this one, look at this. These are twin flames here.
So these
This
lines
one
are
is new.
found in the exact place
Sulcus line,
where they're found
indentation, tapered. Another sulcus line.
in the heart. I'll show you
Same exact
in a heart what that means
rock.
in a moment.
Even down to the sulcus lines. And then look at this little one I found too. That's a beauty. Indentation at the top for the blood vessels.
And then backside will be either flat or concave.
And
If
this
you
is
get
a
them
big
wet.
one. When
I
it's
love
wet,
this part.
It just looks almost bloody. Same with this.
When you wet
Missing
these
a
stones,
chunk.
they look
And
fleshy
then
as
on the
hell.
side, darker red. So, yeah, every once in a while I got to go out and get a little inspiration.
There's
for,
one I sliced open, and there's actually a blood
stuff.
vessel that's
But,
quartz going through the center of it.
It's very repeatable.
And here you see there's the aorta vena
Predictable.
cava, exactly where they should be. So these
Bizarre.
to say that these have formed through random chance and banging around in a river bottom, I think is absurd. It's clearly a pattern. It's very repeatable. It's highly specific. Can I explain it all? No, but I have my theories, as we talked about before. This idea of the boiled egg theory. Where do the muscles and the bones go? Well, if you cook them in a crock pot, they turn to sponge and just dissolve, right? That's what bone broth is. So along the way, I didn't know about this, but this was one of the most amazing discoveries I ever came across. This is the discovery of a man named Francisco Torrent Guasp. He was the discoverer of the myocardio-ventricular band. He proved unequivocally that the heart is not what we were taught. The anatomy is very different from what people are learning. and the function as well. So just take a look at this. This is just a 1-minute video.
Did you know that almost everything you were taught about the heart is wrong? Most everyone today, even doctors, still believe the heart to be a 4-chamber pump that pushes blood through a mind-boggling 60,000 miles of narrowing blood vessels to fuel our 40 trillion cells, then filling again as if by magic on relaxation. Well, that theory was thoroughly debunked by the Spanish cardiologist Francisco Torrent Guasp back in 1972. After dissecting thousands of hearts, Guasp.
So he's showing that this is called the interventricular sulcus. He's going to open this up and then close it back. And I didn't know about that line, and I didn't think to even look for it in the stones. But after seeing this documentary about his life, I ran to my collection, and that line was in exactly the right place in a number of the stones.
Finally discovered the heart's true structure. The heart's far more amazing than we ever knew. It's like a rope, a long tube wrapped into a knot. Instead of being pushed, the blood is pulled through the heart in 2 spiraling vortexes. This has been proven with CAT scans, functional MRI, and positronic emission. Look at the spiraling contraction. It changes everything we know about the heart and circulation. If you'd like to know more, check out these videos.
Yeah, so I've made a lot of videos covering Guasp, his discoveries, and how it relates to the stones. And one of his best friends who facilitated his first dissection of a human heart, he's a Spanish cardiologist in Barcelona. He opened the first heart transplant center in the country. He has actually seen a number of these stones in a video call, and he was blown away, and he said it's clearly heart anatomy. So that's from probably one of the greatest living cardiologists. Francisco Torrent Guasp discovered this in 1972. It's still not integrated into cardiology programs in the way that it should be. But even the fibers of the heart muscle itself are spiraling in 2 opposite rotating vortexes. So not only is the blood vortexing, and you can see up here with the
about the heart
positronic emission,
and circulation.
It's also showing the spiral, the dual direction spiral of the blood flow.
If you'd like to know more,
and the heart muscle. So it's just an astonishing thing. And then after seeing this documentary about his life, I went back to the stones, and not only is there the crease here in many of them, and on the back side you'll see 2, but it has a twist at the bottom, as you can see in the fibers here, and that is a highly specific feature. It looks like a propeller blade from the bottom, and many of these stones have that, and it's something that would be very, very difficult to explain with erosion in a river bottom. And then people have been sending me them examples from all over the world, many times very colorful. The ones here tend to be white. I think it changes depending on region and maybe how recent the last reset was, and all kinds of different factors. But that's it in a nutshell. And I'll just stop the sharing there.
Damn, that is some compelling stuff, man. Honestly, it really is. And I wouldn't say I play around with stones a whole lot, but I definitely feel a little more observant than your average dude. And I think I feel like I've had many stones in my hand that have that top indentation, that kind of V curve in. And I'm like, man, maybe I've held some rock hearts and I didn't even know it. It's just so interesting. So I also wanted to point out to people, because we do like the mystical around here, there is a good bit of synchronicity in all this. So my understanding is when you were examining the mountain of the Mammoth, you were walking around, you're like, God, give me some kind of sign, give me some kind of clue, help me along this path. And that is when you found the original heart stone in the river bottom, right then when you asked for guidance and it came. And then if that wasn't enough, you are clearly an American living in Spain, and you later discovered this guy whose video we just watched, and he happened to live in the next town over at the foothills of this very mountain.
He made the discovery about the heart on the mountain. His house is on the foothills of the mountain. He was working out of private practice for decades. And, the cardiology community was not acknowledging his discoveries. It took that 25 or more years before it started to catch on. And like I said, it still hasn't been really integrated into the zeitgeist by any means. Most people have never seen this information. Yeah, so what are the odds of that this guy who I learned these two features about the heartstones, the sulcus lines and that twist at the bottom, he literally lived and worked on the mountain that I had been investigating. Like, what?
It's unbelievable. That stuff adds a layer to it where I'm like, no, maybe I should put some thought into this. It's almost like the universe is constantly whispering the truth to us if we can read those signs and follow along the path.
And now the mountain winks at you.
Yeah, it's fucking nuts.
And the river's named after Medusa. Like, what?
It's all right there.
Yeah, and then I've done a stream called Synchronicity Stream. I'll just tell this crazy story real quick, because I had all these stories that I wanted to tell, and so I decided to do a stream just telling the stories that were so wild. And in the course of deciding what to use as the thumbnail for the video, I flashed back on a photograph of me when I'm hugging General Sherman, the biggest tree in the world. And that was taken like 30 years ago. So I decided, I'm going to use that as the thumbnail. So I went to my collection and I managed to find it, because it's not digital, actual photograph, scanned it in, created the thumbnail, which is called Synchronicity Stream, spelled STREEM for tree, because it was all about the synchronicities related to the great trees. And then I pulled up different quotes related to the term synchronicity, which I wanted to introduce people to if they weren't familiar with it, from Carl Jung. And initially I was pulling up text, and then I'm like, no, I'll just pull up a meme, because I can search for a synchronicity quote, Carl Jung, and it'll already be formatted and look good for the presentation. So I do that, and up comes all of the images that I was expecting to see. And the first image on the second line, I looked at it, and it was a friend of mine that I hadn't talked to in over 20 years. I'm like, what? His name is David Rico. I'm like, why is he showing up? David Rico's an author, right? So I click on it, wondering like, why is David Rico's face there, And it turns out that David Rico has written a book called Synchronicity.
Oh my God.
So no, it gets crazier. So this all literally happened like a half an hour to an hour before I was about to hit go live, for the stream. Yeah, he'd written a book about synchronicity. What are the odds? He shows up in this search. Every other image was Carl Jung except for that one of him, which I couldn't miss, So going back 30 years or so, I was traveling with my mom and David Rico and my girlfriend, and we went up to a camp where he was going to be a guest lecturer for the week. And he had 2 days lecturing, 1 day off, and 2 days lecturing. And we were in the Sequoia National Forest in this camp called Far Horizons. On the day off that was in the middle, we went to the old grove trees, and we got up next to General Sherman, and I hopped over the fence, which you weren't supposed to do. And I went up and I hugged the tree. And when I did that, David Rico snapped a photograph of me hugging the tree. So the photograph that I had decided to use as the thumbnail was taken by the guy who came up in the Google search when I was just about to do a stream on synchronicity. He'd written a book about synchronicity.
God, is anything real?
So
I don't know.
There you go.
It's
like,
crazy.
It starts to get supernatural when you string all that kind of stuff together. So
it's true. We should be more observant of these things in our own lives. So let's jump to the book, and I will piece this into. Yes, I'll piece this into both parts of the show. So we don't have to go too deep into the book, though it is full of fun things I highlighted and would enjoy talking to you about. Probably not really even the best material for this show, not maybe resonant with this audience, but more just interesting stuff. Regardless, when you were sentenced, you were given a couple of weeks of jail time, a year of probation, and mandatory community service, where you were tasked with helping the National Coalition for Children's Justice to build a network and database to track and catch child traffickers and abusers. Here's a quote from your book about the conversation you had with the organization's founder, Ken Wooden. Without going into graphic detail, Ken told me the horror stories of child slavery, satanic cults, and hideous rituals involving children. He continued, most of the children who go missing are never found. Many suffer horrible abuse at the hands of sinister people. Tragically, most of these crimes go unreported, and despite our countless attempts to grab their attention, the media remains almost entirely silent. Why won't they do anything about it, you asked? It's hard to say, Michael. It might be because some of these crimes involved individuals in powerful positions who like things the way they are. We do our best to expose these horrors, but all too often we're ignored by those with the power to do something about it. I'm certain more of these children can be found, and this is where you might be able to help. You see, I believe that the creation of a nationwide network for tracking missing children would be the perfect tool in the fight. When Ken first told me of the horrors perpetrated on children worldwide, I must admit it sounded far-fetched. Satanists and government and secret organizations kidnapping and using children for horrific rituals? It seemed more like the makings of a Hollywood movie. But in the decades since, Ken's information has shown itself to be highly accurate and sadly far more widespread than most can imagine. Ken was decades ahead of his time. Ugh, wow. This is not the main thrust of the book, but it is relevant to your story. And yeah,
nitty gritty.
Well, that's my thing. So
it is the quintessential conspiracy podcast. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know about that, but anyway, so you said it, not me, but a lot has been exposed since that time, from the founders cult and the Franklin scandal to Nexium and of course Epstein. But can you elaborate on any of the things that Ken might have told you that stuck out? Maybe things that are less known about?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that was happening back then is that they were very organized. They were using bulletin boards to communicate and share information with each other, just like the hackers were. And, computer hobbyists in general, the BBSs of the 80s was kind of our first wave of internet for the individual. And that was where I gleaned a lot of information, was from the bulletin boards and then party lines. We would do conference calling, making use of a service called Alliance Teleconferencing, which we knew how to game. The people that were, capturing and trafficking children, they were making use of these systems as well. So initially when Kenneth Wooden reached out to the judge, he saw me on television. His friend was George Gallup of the Gallup polls. And George saw me coming out of the courtroom at the arraignment, which was very big news. It hit the newspapers across the country. And so when that happened, he called up Ken and he said, I've got an idea. You've been talking about wanting to create this network, to try and track missing children, because up until that point, apart from putting their faces on milk cartons and some sort of an MK Ultra mind control kind of a fear porn thing for children, you get your cereal in the morning and worry about getting kidnapped.
I'm glad you said that, because that's how I think of it too. It's like, you got to expose the stuff somehow, but I always had a weird feeling about that too, that it was kind of a fear-based thing.
Yeah, but there was no interstate cooperation in the country at that time. If you took the child across the border to another state, it was basically yours, right? They weren't gonna chase it down. So that was what he was trying to get around and to improve upon. And so he didn't have the funds to put together some massive network. And so he and George Gallup had this idea of, what if we started to use the skills of young hackers who are good guys but have run amok of the law, and utilize their skills to build this network. And so that was how that whole thing began. And I pulled in a couple of my hacking buddies, one of whom showed up on the radar on October 17th for the first time I'd talked to him in years and years. And it happened to be the 40-year anniversary of my bust. I was busted on October 17th, 1985. So synchronicity has followed me a lot through all of this stuff. But so he was a real vanguard. And he wrote a book called Child Lures, Crying in the Playtime of Others, and was the founder of this coalition for children's justice, and spent a lot of years educating in schools and trying to teach parents, what the warning signs were and how to, avoid your child being one of the victims of that sort of thing. So, and then
Damn.
he told me about the SRA and satanic ritual abuse and these other things. And so that was a bit of a red pill for me at 19 years old. And in the decades since, it's all, come to light. You see what, the royal families with the prince and the Vatican and all that was revealed for what they were doing, tens of thousands of priests, doing horrible things and just being shuffled around. And you got the Epstein thing, Nixium and all this stuff. It's like, okay, well, he was right.
I mean, yeah, I am just curious. I mean, primarily I'm always most curious about when it's ritualized or when it involves dark magic or something, that it's not just, oh, I'm attracted to children, so I steal them and abuse them for my sexual pleasure. That's obviously sick and gross, but I mean, it's way more bizarre and complex to think that there is a power attained by doing something like this, that it isn't about them getting off. It's more about like harnessing human sacrifice and that sort of stuff.
I very much believe that's happening on a widespread basis in the upper echelons of power. There's just so much evidence to prove it. And this is a little, I took it out of the book, but there was a section in the book that I had originally. It was about Aaron Swartz. Are you familiar with him?
A little bit. Aaron Swartz, is he the Reddit guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a documentary about his life called, there's probably several, but The Internet's Own Boy. And he was a real champion of the decentralization that was, one of the tenets of the hacker philosophy, right? Distrust of government, information should be free, decentralization so that power can't be consolidated in the hands of the few. The idea that we can use technology to better our lives and improve our plight here, right, when it's not being used for nefarious means and for control purposes. So these are kind of the hacking ethics, which are applicable to what we would call the truther community in today's world. Aaron Swartz was really a champion of those ideas and wrote texts on them. And so he was busted for going into MIT Media Labs, which interestingly enough, it ties directly to Bill Gates and Epstein in a very big way.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were funding and they were deeply involved in stuff that was going on there. And he was down in one of the server rooms, and he basically liberated 2.3 million articles that were in JSTOR, which is like you've got PubMed and Elsevier, and then you have JSTOR, which are like the big repositories of research that are found around the world. But everything's behind a paywall. So if you're like a genius kid in a third world country, you're not going to have access to any of the latest research because you got to pay for it, right? So he thought that was fundamentally wrong. If information should be free, if something can be used for the betterment of humanity, it shouldn't be patented, capitalized upon, and then feed into the greed matrix, which is exactly what we live in now, right? So yeah. He was a real hero, in my opinion, a hacker from heaven, I would call him. And that was actually the name of the program that Kenneth Wooden founded, that I was a part of, was Hackers from Heaven. And there's chapters in the book about that. That's what you were reading there. But when Schwartz went in, he downloaded all these articles, but there were people that were theorizing, because he supposedly committed suicide, which is very, very odd, the timing of it. And, he looked like he could potentially get off with a lot less. But, they say that he killed himself, and I don't believe it for a second. But interestingly, there's people who have talked about, because he was connected to fiber optic, and, text files don't take that long to download. A movie or, several movies, that's a different thing. So some people are hypothesizing that maybe the reason he died is because he was accessing a whole bunch of other information that was probably video. And so, it's a speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised, because I don't believe that he or Epstein killed himself. Oh, actually, I just watched your last episode with McAfee's wife.
Oh yeah, I was actually
So
going to ask you your thoughts on John McAfee. So first off, yeah, I knew there was an Epstein MIT link broadly, but I did not know that. I mean, I guess you just have to assume if there's that link, then who knows what really was down there. But what Aaron liberated, to use the term that I'm aware of, it was like a repository of data that like any student could access. So it was just gate kept to students.
or you were part of a research institution or a government facility. So again, it's gatekeeping of knowledge.
Exactly. So I really don't think it's that big of a deal that it was exposed. But then, yeah, I never really thought much about until you said it, the idea that maybe there was some dark compromise or some of these dark Epstein adjacent things and he got it. And so they were like, well, you can't live knowing that or having that. Man,
It's a possibility. I mean, all the weird stuff on his ranch with the cloning and these things that have a lot of information has come out about that stuff. And the connection, and also I think the lab director, the MIT Media Lab director, like was forced to resign under controversial circumstances. So
let me ask you about McAfee, just because there's a lot of weird stuff there. Having read the book, you were at ground zero with this phone freaking, and I actually like these stories where hacking had a little more physicality to it, or a little more mechanical nature to like what you were doing. There's a really interesting story about this guy, Captain Crunch, who basically discovered that I might be mixing two stories, but somebody whistled and then they realized that the phone had an effect. So then in some cases, you just call the company and you say, what happened here? And they explain it to you, and then it's exploited. So he found out that the Captain Crunch whistle that came in a cereal box made a certain tone that triggered the phone to allow for a free long distance call or something adjacent to that.
it was a bit more complicated than that. It was the tone was 2600 hertz, and there's actually been a long-standing publication called that. That's a hacker magazine, and then there's another one that was called what is it? Frack, which is like freaking and hacking combined.
Yeah.
Frack episode 4 talks about me and my bust, but 2600 hertz. If you blew that tone, it would knock the operator off of her trunk. So she would think the line got disconnected. And then if you had the ability to create multi-frequency tones that were the same tones that were being used by the network, then if you had the skills and you knew how to do it, you could do anything the telephone operator could do. And she had no idea because she was just on to her next call. So there were these things called blue boxes and red boxes and lots of other colored boxes. The blue box was the most famous of them because that was creating these tones. That's how Apple got started, actually.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs and Wozniak were creating the first digital version of those. So they brought the size down and the price, was affordable. And so they made a lot of money selling those. And just at the point where they were probably about to get busted for fraud or facilitating fraud, they left it behind. They used that money to found Apple.
That's so crazy.
That's their story. Who knows if it's true or not? But
you're also very clear in the book. I know we're going to talk about McAfee, but you're also very clear in the book about your disdain for Bill Gates. And just because you were giving the hacker ethos, I also wanted to point out how instrumental he was in kind of breaking all that up and like being the one to be like, no, we got to privatize this stuff and we've got to patent it. And once one person does that, I mean, other people start to follow suit because like it kind of becomes like a race to the bottom or a race to centralized, compromised capital and all this kind of thing. But he was so key in that. And of course, he doesn't know a whole lot about computers from my understanding. It was really his mom who worked for MIT who basically mobilized the students of MIT. She said, hey, whoever can help my son with his little computer company in the garage is going to get an A+ or whatever the hell, And so really it was a groupthink effort from MIT that propelled this figurehead to basically destroy that hacker ethos and destroy that spirit of the early internet that was just so crucial. And I just wanted to point that out. But McAfee, I want to know your thoughts. I am one of the thoughts I'm curious about is there's a premise that he might have created the virus itself, that there might not have been a need for McAfee software at all. I mean, we eventually arrived at viruses, but he did the problem reaction solution template. And, he's a bit of a prankster. I wouldn't put it past him, but give me your general thoughts on McAfee. If you heard that interview, any thoughts that came up?
Well, I'll talk about Gates first. First of all, the most successful eugenicist family in history, I would say. I don't think he's a good man at all. Had I known the things that I know about him now, back then, I probably would have gotten in more trouble because I would have been like trying to take down the Death Star. I think he's scum, really. The things that he's done in this world, and yeah, I'd tell him to his face if I met him. Hope I never do.
You don't want to go to jail again.
Well, yeah, definitely not happening. I'm hacking reality now instead of computers. So, yeah. What else? So McAfee, I actually learned a lot listening to that episode. I didn't know the details of his disappearance and death, and I didn't realize he was in Barcelona at the time. But yeah, I kind of stepped away from tech for a lot of years. I actually ended up going to work at IBM in 2000, which is funny because I was hired as a tech writer, and they didn't. I was an exchange student in Italy in 97, 98, and I moved back to Italy after I was done and ended up working for a year at IBM, and they had no idea that I was a hacker, and I didn't disclose. So, but yeah, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to the tech. I've left it all behind, so I wouldn't get in trouble with it now.
Yeah, I really wish that McAfee episode had made more of an impact, not even out of an ego reason or anything like that, but just her being so candid. I wanted more to happen for her because she really was trying to make the point that a lot of people gave up on the dead man's switch because it's just probably too complex. And I think she was trying to say, like, no, if you go back to his tweets at the time, which she was transcribing, there's a lot of breadcrumbs and clues, and that the data is somehow attached or compartmentalized within the whacked token. I mean, the guy got a goddamn tattoo of it on his arm. It was clearly important. And if you were trying to figure out how you would distribute blackmail material or a compromat folder, a dead man switch, it would have to be extremely decentralized, and you wouldn't want to put anyone you knew at risk. So if you launched a cryptocurrency token and somehow in it was a countdown, people have acknowledged that there was a countdown to what? We don't know. Was it actually compromised? Some people think that the bad guys got in there and stopped it somehow, but Janice doesn't think so. She thinks that it's still available to those willing to not give up. And I mean, I wouldn't want to find it. You know what happens to those people. I don't want to get Aaron Schwartzed, but apparently it's out there.
She seemed pretty genuine and authentic, and she was very forthright in all of the questions that you raised, and she provided a lot of additional information. She didn't strike me as somebody that was trying to sidestep things, and she seemed genuinely interested in solving it and doesn't believe that he was killed, but she also didn't believe that he's still alive. I think that was an interesting point. Like he was a very unusual character, so his hubris being a little too big to go all of these years without surfacing in some way that would give clues. So it seems like he's gone, and hopefully there is a dead man switch. That's the whole hackers from heaven idea for me is Robert Steele, I believe his name is. He was a former CIA agent.
He's been here too.
Oh, yes. He once described computer hackers as the Minutemen of the digital era. And I thought that was a really good idea, that when the totalitarian nightmare system is rolled out, like, how is that going to be stopped? And in the end, it's going to be your weaponized autists, or these people that are like super genius computer kinds of people that might be able to take it down. It's the Neos in the Matrix sort of a thing. And so maybe there is hope, even as the digital IDs and agendas, this, that, and the other are rolled out seemingly without pause. Maybe in the end it'll be some genius behind a keyboard that throws a monkey wrench in the watchworks.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So another thing I wanted to ask you about related to the book is Gary McKinnon. So he wrote not only the foreword, somewhat of a foreword, but also a nice blurb. I'll just read here. He says, whether you're a technophile or a truth seeker or simply drawn to stories of defiance and redemption, Wilkerson's journey will leave a mark. It reminds us that sometimes the ones society cast out as threats are in fact the most necessary mirrors and its most unlikely heroes. Kind words. I actually reached out to Gary maybe 5 or 6 years ago and tried to get an interview with him. And he's like, I can't talk about any of that stuff anymore. And I know he had a CEO or an SEO business. And if I would have been further down chain, I would have hired Gary McKinnon to do the SEO for the Higher Side Chats, because that would have just been so freaking cool. But I didn't have it at the time. Anyway, the reason I want to ask you about him is obviously because you're operating in a certain kind of mental paradigm about what reality is, and it's almost in conflict with what he says he saw in those computers. Of course, it's secret space program stuff, non-terrestrial astronauts, space platforms, UFOs, alternative energy. I hesitate to get too specific because I tried to do a little digging before this ran out of time. I don't know exactly what he said versus what others have kind of extrapolated and added on to that. But I do believe non-terrestrial astronauts, a list of them, was real. And I think during the Disclosure Project, if I remember his quote, he did say that he had confirmation of the things he was curious about, UFOs and alternative energy. But how does this jive with where you are in your model of reality? Do you think about it at all? I think you trust Gary and what he saw.
Yeah, I believe that he, is telling the truth about what he saw, and I don't necessarily think that his observations are in conflict with my worldview. I mean, we talk about extraterrestrials. Well, if there are outer realms, that's extraterrestrial, right?
Fair.
So I think that the different aliens, all the UFO people, the ancient aliens and all that kind of stuff, and the grays and the tall, thin ones and all these different species that they're constantly talking about, I have no problem with those beings actually existing. They could exist within a hollow earth. They could exist underwater. Non-terrestrial could be in the water, right? So there's all kinds of things that you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of problems that I have with the heliocentric model and the spinning ball. When it comes to the things that Gary was seeing, he saw photographs that took him forever to download because the file sizes were so large of what appeared to be craft. I have no problem with
Have you seen those?
Alien craft. No, I've never seen them.
Okay.
I don't know if he still has them. Probably not. But when we look at, Ben has covered this, Analog has covered this extensively, like the dirigibles and all the aircraft, and clearly all kinds of technologies have been hidden and sequestered, and some are trickled out to us as new innovation, but are actually just recycling of old stuff that you can see pictures of in the publications from 100 years ago. So when it comes to aliens flying around in the sky or anti-gravity devices and all that, you don't have to have a heliocentric model to still be able to accommodate for those things.
To me, it was the thing that always stuck out was space platform. And I don't know that he ever said that, but it is the thing that stuck in my brain when I think about the story. But what do you think of the ISS? Do you think that's real?
No. I've seen no evidence that it's real. There's so much fakery, harness fails, bubbles in space, CGI layering glitches, hairspray, you name it. There's no footage of the greatest construction in history being constructed. It's just in this magic Goldilocks zone that's based on Einsteinian gravity, which I also don't believe in. I'll recommend too. Well, you had Mark Gober on. He's and
Eric Dubay.
and Eric Dubé. And I would recommend you get Stephen Young on. He's an amazing author.
Australian guy.
No, he's Scottish, and he's written a book called A Fool's Wisdom. He's a he has a PhD in nuclear physics and quantum physics, and has basically jumped ship with all of those theories because he's come to the conclusion that they're all based on pseudoscience, which I'm in agreement with, and so is Mark Gober. So as far as the ISS goes, there's whenever they show the supposed live feed, there's always too much curvature based on their distance. So they're clearly using a fisheye lens. So it could just be a high flying military craft, and Google Earth, they're just taking strips and stitching them together, and they can easily map that around a ball.
Well, I've obviously thought about a lot of this stuff too. And the ISS is the one kind of sticking point that I can't really get around. I mean, I'm good friends with someone who goes by Robot Polisher online. His name is not known, but I'm the one who told him about the flat Earth, and he just went off the freaking rails making this content.
Seen some of his videos. He's fun.
He's great. He doesn't even talk. He does not talk. He just uses their clips and puts them together and is like, does this look legit to you? And again, all that stuff you're talking about, the haired sprayed hair and the bubbles, the suggestions that it seems like a lot of that's filmed underwater. But there is a dot in the sky that goes around, they say is the ISS, and you can see it and you can geolocate it. And that's one thing. But here's the thing that's crazy to me. I guess my belief is like, so what happens up there? Is there a point where things do float? Because my wife and I were sitting out here outside in Florida, and we saw this crazy it looked like a dragon of dots through the sky. And we're like, what the hell is that? And then it's like, of course, well, that's supposed to be Starlink. Well, What is Starlink? Because I saw it, like one dot looks like a star. So the ISS, you're like, well, I don't know what that is. Maybe that's not technological. But to see Starlink up there and to have previously doubted satellites at all, and you get into the temperatures that are supposed to exist up there, and all this stuff should burn up and not work. What the hell? How could it
talk
work?
Hours about this subject? But, if you think of the ISS, the size of the ISS is said to be roughly a football field, right? So if you think about how big is Boeing 747, that's roughly the same size, right? Well, at 35,000 feet cruising altitude, it's pretty tiny. If you double the distance to an object, it's 1/4 the size. It works with light as well. It's the inverse square law of light. Like every time you double the distance, it's going to be 1/4 the intensity. If you halve the distance, it's 4 times as intense. Okay. Well, the optics work the same way, right? So it should not be visible at 253 miles or whatever they say they're hovering at, because at 35,000 feet, how far is that? How many miles is that? I don't know, but it's not very many miles, right? And so you double that again, you double that again. There's no reason that we should be able to see something the size of a football field at that distance, unless you have powerful optics.
Right. It is actually 6.6 miles at 35,000 feet.
So double that 12, double that 24, double that 48. That's a lot of doubling, right? And that means it's got to be 1/4 the size each time you double it.
And if I were to just quickly look at how high up is Starlink, that's a little bit harder.
I'm not sure about Starlink, but the ISS is something like 250 miles.
Oh, it actually says the operational range for Starlink satellites is between 340 to 600 kilometers, or 211 to 382 miles. So it's supposed to be like roughly 300 miles up compared to 6 miles up. But I saw it, and these are supposed to be smaller. No, so now that's weird. The ISS is supposed to be 6.
I could bring up so many weird things.
Right. I can't do that hand sign. People are going to get me.
Too late.
Yeah, I know. 6 miles up for the ISS, and then 300 miles up for Starlink. Starlink is a much smaller set of satellites. I'm just like, I know what I saw in the sky, and I just want to know how they did it. I'm not saying it's the conclusive smoking gun that heliocentrism is real, but I'm curious in this alternative paradigm how they did it, how it could, because it looked very strange. Anyone who's seen Starlink would probably say it looks like a serpent of lights going through the sky.
No footage of ISS construction, no telemetry data, 14,000 reels gone missing. I'd like to do a shout out to my best friend, Alex Michael. Are you familiar with Conspiracy Music Guru?
No. Conspiracy Music Guru. I feel like this is something.
Conspiracy Music Guru.
I feel like he has come. He has been presented to me or recommended to me before, but I haven't really gone.
He is the Conspiracy Music Guru. You can play any style of music, and he's just like, he's got I Told You So, television watching news believer. He's got a whole album about NASA fakery, and it's all the lyrics are amazing, and the quality of the production. You should have him on. He would be an awesome guy to interview. You would have a lot of fun. Guarantee it.
Well, you gave me a couple recommendations. I only do 5 shows a month. You just filled almost a month for me. I wouldn't mind talking to Ken too, if he's still around, and I know he's still around.
Kenneth Wooden.
Yeah.
He passed away a few years ago. Unfortunately, he lived to his 80s. He sent me a photograph when he turned 80. He went skydiving at 80 years old. He was a cool guy. But I did get I got to interview him, and I haven't released it yet on my channel. So I have an hour of footage talking with him. At some point, I'll put that out. Oh, and you mentioned Gary McKinnon. Did you hear how that came about?
No.
He posted a comment on one of my YouTube videos. And I didn't know if he knew about my hacking past or if he was there for the research. And it turned out he didn't know anything about my hacking.
Wow.
And so I sent him a little 3-minute promo video. I don't know, maybe you could play that at the end for people who are interested in the book. And I was like, hey, by the way, did you know about this? And he's like, no, we should talk.
Yeah, so that's amazing.
We ended up having a conversation. We had a Zoom call, 2 actually, and talked for about 4 or 5 hours. And at the very beginning of the first call, I was like, this is going to be an interesting conversation. I'm sure. I'll bet there's a lot of people that would love to hear this. Should we just record it? And he's like, yeah, go ahead. So I put the first hour of that conversation up on my channel, and it's called Hackers from Heaven.
Like I said, 2 or maybe 3 lives, all within one man, all more interesting than my own. Amazing. I will be the first. Obviously, we're going close to 3 hours, but I will be the first to humble up and apologize for my initial dismissal of the work and your channel. Something definitely is going on with all that, but I'm still not sure what to do with it. But I'm sure you plan to keep pushing on this. What are the next steps or next parts of this ongoing investigation that you think you're going to pursue?
I know a couple. You mentioned Jerry Pollack. I was actually at the water conference and got to meet him. And again, I met him at Confluence where he spoke. And unfortunately, he's fallen ill. I think he's like not doing well. So
shit.
A lot of people are praying for him. So
I did not know this. I just know that he told me he would give me an interview on December 6th, and maybe I should assume that might not happen.
There's a good chance it might not. I have a friend who's close with him, and I can ask her and mention that you had something scheduled, but I have a feeling that might not happen.
I mean, I don't care about my own interview. I obviously care about his health, but how interesting that a guy would fall ill, a guy of his stature, right when he has a book coming out about anti-gravity and how it could all work. I mean, he's applied his knowledge, his scientific brain. He's gone from the 4th phase of water to now a book about anti-gravity, and then he suddenly falls ill. I mean, people can get ill, but like this pattern keeps repeating, Mike.
He was a really interesting person to talk with. I got to sit down with him a couple times, but there were a bunch of really high-level scientists that were there, and a couple of them have laboratories. So unlike the runaround I got from the clowns in the US that we mentioned before, these guys are the real deal. So my hope is to do some spectroscopy with these stones and maybe some other things that I'm not aware of that could be done to try and nail down better what the constituent components are. Because obviously if the periodic table is up for grabs, then it makes it a little trickier. But if there's a way to show that there's a correlation between fleshy hearts and the stones accounting for transmutation of elements. I'm not sure how to go about that, but it's tough, unless I can like figure out how to recreate them or something like that. It's hard to know, other than what I've already been doing, which is showing a very repeatable pattern that's highly specific, and they also look like hearts. Oh, I forgot to mention that this guy who was the right-hand man of GWASP that facilitated his first dissection. Oh no, I did mention I had a video call with him, and I showed him these stones, and he was blown away, and he's like, "This is an amazing discovery. Congratulations." And so he's not a geologist, but he does happen to know a lot more about the heart than probably just about anybody out there. So
Wow.
that's an interesting thing.
Yeah. So I just happened to go and look at my last email with Gerald Pollack, and he gave me a link to the book to read, for free before we did an interview. And the link is now defunct. I think the book is out there though. The book is supposed to have come out in September. So I don't know if it is out there, guys, buy the book, support Gerald Pollack. I mean, especially in this tough time that he's apparently having.
Well, a lot of the stuff about the heart and the circulatory system, and the discoveries of GWASP, they also tie in with the fourth phase of water, because the blood is not being pushed through the circulatory system; it's being propelled, you could say, and maybe functions more like a ram pump, in the sense that the heart is actually like the metronome of the body, where it's literally stopping blood flow, not creating it. It's a very far out subject, and it changes the heart has the biggest electromagnetic field in the body, far greater than the brain, and it extends beyond the body, and it's measurable. So we're talking about arc reactors inside of each and every one of us, right? Like Iron Man's. It's truth in plain sight.
Truth
they don't
in
want
plain
us to
sight,
know
yep.
that we're all Iron Men and women.
Just like the Tesseract and the Black Cube, and like, why are two of the biggest franchises, Avengers and Transformers, all centered around the Black Cube, a cosmic space cube AI thing?
Well, and all the stuff from Ben Radium, all the radium videos, and so everything that's like green, like kryptonite, and all these things, like the I don't know, the super, it's always green, glowing green.
Sure.
It
is kryptonite. Wow. Well, we could do this all day, man. And I just wanted to throw out Charged, Gerald Pollack's book. Obviously, like you said, electromagnetism. It all has to do with electromagnetism. His book is called Charged, The Unexpected Role of Electricity in the Workings of Nature. Ding, ding, ding. He's right on it, as he always has been. And Stellium7 is your channel. What's Stellium?
It's an astrological term. My mom was an astrologer when I was growing up, and so I grew up with astrology and have studied it a lot myself. And anytime you have 3 or more planets in a particular sign or a particular house, it's called the stellium, and it represents like a concentration of particular energies in focusing on one particular thing. And I have a 5-planet stellium in the 7th house. So that's where it came from.
What is the 7th house known for?
It's all about relationships. It's ruled by Libra, and relationship would be the big thing. So I'm looking at the relationships between things, right?
Yes.
Pattern recognitionist.
I love it. Well, this has been a real pleasure. I mean, thanks for giving me an extra hour of your time. Just crazy. Anything else to leave people with?
I don't know.
Get the book. Stellium7's the YouTube channel.
Yeah, The Hacker Prince. It is a fun read. It is a page turner. I've had at least half a dozen different published authors who've read it, who've praised the writing style, and it's very engaging. I've been told by a number of people that it reads like a movie. It's called The Hacker Prince: A True Story, because all the stuff that's in it actually happened, and it's one of those truth is stranger than fiction kind of things. It's great for the 50-something-year-olds that are technophiles that have the nostalgia from that time period, but a teenager would love it as well. So I think everybody in between.
Heck yeah.
And check out the channel, and if you do go and sub, please comment. It's been algorithmed like a lot of other channels, and it's fun when there's engagement.
Yes, I know about that stuff. So Very cool. Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Thank you for taking the time, and take care out there. Keep doing this awesome work, man. I'm changed. I don't know how I'm going to go back to regular life now. I'm broken.
It's an honor to be invited, and I've been listening to you off and on for years. So it's fun to talk with you face to face.
Right on. I agree.
Fun.
Cheers, man. Woo, Lordy. All right. Well, that was a mean one, Mr. Grinch. We did it. The long-awaited exploration of biogeology with the hacker prince himself, Mike Stellium7 Wilkerson. Probably one of the most requested guests I think that I have gotten in the last year or so. And I think I also did a pretty good job explaining why I didn't try to make it happen sooner. I also wanted to get into that stuff right out of the gate for other people who might have had similar skepticisms. Because when you hear Mike separate himself from those other folks, like maybe the mud fossil folks, it just got me all that much more interested. I started to lean in more because he understands the skepticism and what a more appropriate framing for this stuff is. He's just got a really great way in general of approaching this very bizarre material. I think I was just afraid to appear gullible or unserious, but whatever. You don't need to make it your new religion just to say, damn, there does seem to be something interesting here, and I don't know what the implications really are, and I don't want to deal with it. I'm just accepting the material for what it is. And I also just wanted to re-emphasize the original spirit of why I got into this stuff, which was more like, hey, here's a person with some very out there perspectives. Let's see how good an argument they make and try to understand why they think what they think. The old quote, it's the mark of a educated man to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Something like that. We just want to get inside the head of the guests and get into their ideas and let the listeners decide where the value is. I don't necessarily want to be the arbiter of what ideas are worthwhile and which ones aren't, any more than just through the guest selection itself. So my first priority is getting back to just presenting interesting, bizarre, unique worldviews and research, and not so much trying to say, hey, here are the exact answers in the back of the book of life. And of course, for something to be compelling, it has to have some believability to it, or then it is just a waste of time. So obviously that is a factor. And after really exploring the stuff Mike does with an open mind, obviously it turned into something, and I just hope it is refreshing to see Mike here for those who follow us separately, and I hope it's intellectually stimulating to those who either ignored this stuff before or have just now come across it. Maybe we all start finding heartstones on our paths. So, yeah, structurally, we did actually get almost an extra 40 minutes with Mike. The first hour is largely an introduction to biogeology and me trying to make sure we fit in the best arguments that resonated with me as I went along with the material. And then the plus show is largely a walkthrough of Mike's latest presentations. So it was a little redundant, but he's got his pitch down and he got all the best clips and put together everything. So I just went with it. If you want to get a taste of that and you aren't a Plus member or you only have the audio, then just go to his YouTube channel. It is basically his Anarcho-Poco adjacent conference presentation, and you can see it right there. And as we're going forward, I don't love having to be so conscious of the audio-video split. I got a free Plus split and now an audio-video split. But what can I do? I guess I could have split the difference and made Plus $10 and given everybody everything just to simplify it. I guess some episodes are just going to have to be more visual heavy, and it is what it is. I find that people kind of have their own content preferences, whether it's a podcast app or a preference for watching. So the thought was, again, I've already talked about this, but people don't want to pay for what they don't need, but make it available for people who want it in a way that can still be independent of YouTube and all that and still provide video. A Plus show like this one makes me kind of second guess that decision to separate things and, makes me wonder if that was best. But with the video storage and streaming bandwidth costs, it just has to be more than something that was folded into the $8 membership. Just the reality. I don't know. I'm always exploring options and I'm open to new ways of doing things. But for now, this was the best I could do coming out of the gate. I didn't expect the studio thing to go south so fast either. But here we are. The audience really is just too big to truly get an opinion from everyone, so I just try to do my best. And at the end of the day, this was a good interview where we structured the material well in a way that was clear and methodical. And that's all there is to it. I guess the rest is a little less important. The Hacker Prince stuff I tried to fold into the free show too, as, it is a product that he worked hard on and has put out there, while the rest of the material is free. So, we do the promo thing. And there are really some wild stories in that book, I will say. We didn't talk about all of them, of course, but one that sticks out to me is when he was a teenager, Mike accepted a flight out to see this other guy who was big in the hacker scene. And later on, Mike found out that guy had a reputation of flying out other hackers and not flying them home until they gave in to his advances. And Mike said the guy was pretty responsive to his no, but that's obviously a precarious situation to be in. Mike's a calm man who has lived a wild life. The other thing that sticks out with this one is that geologist clip talking about the sediment from the volcanic eruption. And that's just something that stuck out to me because you have these geologists learning in school that these layers of rock are developed over millions of years, and they sort of have to operate as if that's true. It's really hard to contradict that, and they have no reason to. But then, if you have a volcanic eruption and you can study it in real time, then this guy is like, wow, this actually can happen very rapidly. This is pretty earth-shattering for our geological assumptions. That's just the sort of thing we should all pay attention to. I don't ever want to completely disrespect the years of study that people put into their areas of interest or blame them for assuming what their teachers taught is true. But it's moments like that clip where you just feel like that guy spent a lot of time building his knowledge up on an incorrect foundation. Just kind of sad because life is so short. Not that all my time is well spent, but this is just the kind of thing that we have talked about quite a bit. A person goes deep into debt to become an expert in a field. Their expertise and understanding of said field and the sacred facts gets them a position in that field for a career. Their income and ability to pay the debt largely becomes dependent on their participation in the perpetuation of the field's status quo. It's a frustrating pattern, but luckily we find a lot of great people who have found ways to follow what they consider to be the truth, even when it conflicts with that pattern. That's a beautiful thing. It's kind of a catch-22 because when someone studies a field without that training, then they're considered easier to dismiss because they don't have it. But sometimes that's what we need. Mike is capable of reading the same books outside the confines of a classroom. He's capable of educating himself on the same material independently without paying the money or being scheduled to do that Tuesdays at 1 p.m. A lot of things aren't as overwhelming and complex as you might think. It's just tough to find the time to dive in and understand them. If you do that, then, a self-directed education is not much different than an official one. Although they would obviously argue with that, but that's how they make their money. Oh, and Mike did send me the lab report that we talked about. It's posted in the show notes. He mentioned the just one-sided nature of it. The whole tone is off. They definitely weren't coming in with an open mind. And he mentions the company logo which is kind of an eye in the pyramid, and their P.O. Box number 322. With a debunking like this, those things do stick out to me as well. No coincidences, as they say. Mike also added for me, and also anyone interested in going deeper on this part of it, that if you don't want to watch the whole 3 hours of Paradigm Crushed, that video he made, definitely check out the last half hour where it covers Aeon's connection to the Explorers Club, because that is very interesting, he says. I also got to add that sadly, he was very right about Dr. Gerald Pollack. I'm not sure where that conversation landed, but he mentioned that Dr. Pollack had had a very serious health incident, and I've learned a bit more since then, and that sadly seems to be very true. My interview isn't going to happen, and the prospect of rescheduling it is also not going to happen anytime soon. Send him your thoughts and prayers, at least energetically, because I have not seen any public comment or notice about this, and maybe they don't want it to be all that known just yet, but it is a thing, sadly, and you can still think about the guy and hope for the best. Another person who turned their research towards alternative energy and anti-gravity and then suffered a debilitating health consequence. In this case, within 30 days of his book's release. Now, Dr. Gerald Pollack is not exactly a young man, but that's always going to make me wonder. That is a pattern we've seen before. And maybe I will try to tackle that book as another solo show. So watch out for that in the next couple weeks. And become a Plus member if you want the second hour of all my interviews and these solo presentations that I'm starting to do more of. They're fun. The HIGHERSIDEChats.com, links in the show notes, 7-day free trial to start you off. It's the only income the show receives, ad-free and action-packed. Okay. So I am happy to have gotten this one out to you guys. I think it's far more exciting than the last one, but everyone has their own flavor of the conspiracy Kool-Aid that they like best. I just try to bring them all out to you often enough to keep everybody interested. But on that note, the last episode with Etienne de la Boetie squared was pretty mixed. I think this one will be mixed too, but with that one, you have comments ranging from, quote, "This was the worst guest that has appeared on the program in a long time," to another direct quote, like another listener said, "We need 6 stars for this one." What am I supposed to do with you people? But I like the range, though it can be confusing to me sometimes when I put on the producer hat, which is why that rating works best. The aggregate thoughts and opinions boil down to a single number. And for the Etienne show, that number is a 3.9. Not my favorite. Not my favorite. But I can appreciate that he came well prepared to make his points in a multimedia presentation. And it's generated almost 100 comments so far. And I appreciate that Etienne is in there talking to Plus people too. That's going the extra mile. More guests have been doing that lately, and that's just a great thing to see. I think really the general audience here just likes us to be a bit more esoteric and out there, right? So that is what it is. And as for the meetup calendar, the other thing we do in these here wrap-ups, let's see where 2 or 3 or more, hopefully, are gathering in my name. December 13th, LA at the Trails Cafe. December 13th, also London at the Rising Sun. And also December 13th, Stoke-on-Trent, United Kingdom, the Yew Tree Inn. 2 United Kingdom meetups on the same day. Be there or be somewhere else. January 3rd, Gilbert, Arizona at Desert Monks Brewing. January 10th, Raleigh, North Carolina, the Raleigh Brewing Company. And January 16th, Michigan City, Indiana at the Burn Elm Brewing Brewhouse. Good stuff. I like to see the calendar used. Go forth and meet each other. Make an event if you're curious as to how it would go. No risk. Maybe all reward? So that is the show. Get a lot more as a Plus member at thehighersidechats.com. Check out the merch at thehighersideclothing.com and let our guests know you had a good time if you did. I've done my part. Your move, official truth deciders, Heartstone hiders, and biogeology deniers. Your fucking move.
I see your face in traffic, and you look so stuck. No sense of adventure, just a routine fuck. They can diagnose depression, but don't know why you're bored. Mystery comes knocking, but you don't answer the door. No, there are lights in the sky, not found on any map. Creatures deep in the forest that no ranger has tagged. There are things in the ocean you won't see from the land. Life's under no obligation to make sure you understand. I'm told the truth is out there when you get past the lies. It comes when you least expect it, and it wears a disguise. It'll tell you everything just for a goof. Can't take any pictures, won't have any proof. So I watch you live like you never wanted it. A lost soul that's forgotten what really haunted is. You didn't ask, but just let me say, this is a horrible approach to seizing the day. There are things you can know that you can't even think. No doctor has medicine like the shaman's next drink. Sleep is never better than inside of the dream. Who promised you anything would be as it seems? I'm told the truth is out there when you get past the lies. It comes when you least expect it, and it wears a disguise. It'll tell you everything, everything, just for